11:30 on a Friday night. Rain hammered against the gleaming marble exterior of Westfield Plaza, transforming the normally pristine shopping center into a glistening, deserted monument. Most of the high-end stores had closed hours ago, their displays of luxury goods now performing for an audience of raindrops. Catherine Morgan sat alone on the cold stone steps at the east entrance, her designer suit soaked through, mascara creating abstract art down her cheeks. The bottle blonde hair that normally framed her face in a perfect corporate bob now clung to her skin like seaweed. Her Lexus keys lay scattered on the wet concrete beside her, just out of reach, as if they too had abandoned her. From inside the darkened mall, David Reeves watched through the glass doors, his weathered security badge hanging from a lanyard around his neck. At 45, the night security guard's face carried the topography of a man who had seen more than his share of life's disappointments. His dark eyes, still sharp despite the hour, assessed the situation with professional detachment. The woman outside was Catherine Morgan, CEO of Innovatech, the woman whose name appeared on his paychecks but who had never once looked him in the eye during her brisk walks through the security checkpoint. The woman now rendered helpless by whatever demons had driven her to this state. David's radio crackled. East entrance all clear? He hesitated, thumb hovering over the talk button. Something about the vulnerability of the moment made him pause. In the harsh fluorescent light of the empty mall, David's reflection stared back at him. A man in a uniform too large for his frame, a ghost walking the corridors of other people's success. East entrance clear, he lied, then switched off the radio. The automatic doors hissed open as David stepped into the downpour. Rain immediately soaked through his uniform, but he barely noticed. Years of standing watch and all weather had made him immune to such discomforts. "Ms. Morgan," he said, his voice carrying over the rainfall, "I can give you a ride home." Catherine looked up, her bloodshot eyes struggling to focus. Recognition failed to register on her face. To her, he was just a uniform, not a person. The thought should have stung, but David was accustomed to invisibility. "My car," she slurred, gesturing vaguely toward the executive parking area. "I need to get home." "You're in no condition to drive," David said firmly. "I finish my shift in 15 minutes. Let me take you home." For a moment, pride battled with necessity in Catherine's eyes. Then her shoulders slumped in defeat. She nodded, a barely perceptible movement that seemed to cost her considerable effort. David extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Catherine took it. Her fingers were ice cold against his calloused palm. As David helped her to her feet, Catherine's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen illuminated briefly with a name, unknown caller. "Your phone," David said, reaching for it. Catherine snatched it away with surprising agility for someone so intoxicated. "No," she said sharply, then softened. "It's nothing. Work never stops." The phone went dark in her hand, but not before David caught a glimpse of the notification beneath the call. "Security breach, level 1. 20 minutes later, David's ancient Honda Civic crawled through the rain-slicked streets of Oakwood's affluent Hillcrest neighborhood. The contrast between his car and the surroundings couldn't have been more stark, like a work boot in a display case of Italian leather. Catherine sat in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window, eyes closed but not sleeping. The steady rhythm of the windshield wipers had lulled her into a state of semi-consciousness. David's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out just enough to see the screen. Peterson, his former colleague. The third call tonight. David silenced it quickly, but not before Catherine's eyes fluttered open. "Important call?" she asked, more lucid than she had been at the mall. "No," David replied, returning his attention to the road. "Just an old friend who doesn't understand time zones." Catherine seemed to accept this explanation, turning back toward the window. "Left at the next light," she murmured. "The building with the copper awning." The phone buzzed again in David's pocket. This time he ignored it completely, but his jaw tightened involuntarily. Whatever Peterson wanted, it couldn't be good. Not at this hour, not after everything that had happened. As they pulled up to Catherine's building, a gleaming high-rise of glass and steel that probably cost more per square foot than David's entire apartment, she fumbled with her purse. "I should pay you," she said, the words slightly less slurred than before. "For the ride." "That's not necessary," David replied, a hint of offense in his voice. "I'm not a taxi service." Catherine looked at him properly for the first time, her blue eyes clearing as they focused on his face. You work for Innovatech, she said, recognition finally dawning. Security, right? Night security at the plaza, David confirmed, surprised she had made the connection in her state. 18 months now. Something passed across Catherine's face, embarrassment perhaps, at not having recognized one of her own employees. Or maybe it was simply the nausea catching up with her. Thank you, she said, the words coming out stiffly, as if gratitude was an unpracticed muscle. I appreciate your discretion. As she stepped out of the car, Catherine swayed slightly. David moved quickly around the vehicle to steady her, one hand gently gripping her elbow. For a moment, they stood in the rain together, the CEO and the security guard, both equally drenched, equally human. I can make it from here, Catherine insisted, pulling away slightly. David hesitated. Are you sure? Catherine nodded, then reached into her purse and handed him a business card. If you ever need anything, she said, the standard executive line that usually meant nothing. David pocketed the card without looking at it. Good night, Ms. Morgan. As Catherine disappeared through the glass doors of her building, David's phone buzzed a third time. With a sigh, he answered it. Peterson, it's midnight. What do you want? The voice on the other end was urgent, tense. David, they found it. The vulnerability I warned them about. It's worse than we thought. David's blood ran cold. That's not my problem anymore, he said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it wasn't true. They're going to exploit it, Peterson continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. And when they do, Innovatech won't be the only one that suffers. David glanced up at Catherine's building, where a light had just come on in a top-floor apartment. I can't get involved, he said firmly. I have Jason to think about. That's exactly why you should care, Peterson replied. This is bigger than corporate espionage now. This is about... David ended the call, his hand trembling slightly. The rain had intensified, drumming against the roof of his car like impatient fingers. He sat there for a long moment, caught between the past he'd left behind and the present he'd carefully constructed, a life held together by routine and necessity. Neither of them could have predicted how that rainy night would unravel everything they thought they knew about each other, or how the words security breach would change both their lives forever. The next Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made everything feel possible. David Reeves stood in his tiny kitchen at 5:30 a.m., brewing coffee in a mug decorated with faded Star Wars characters. His apartment was small but meticulously organized, every surface bearing the mark of a man who found comfort in order. His son Jason sat at their second-hand table, already awake and hunched over what looked like a complex diagram drawn on the back of yesterday's newspaper. At 10 years old, Jason had inherited his father's analytical mind and his mother's artistic eye, a combination that produced the intricate schematics now sprawling across the kitchen table. Dad, why don't they make medicine that doesn't taste so bad? Jason asked without looking up from his drawing. I could design a delivery system that targets taste buds differently. David smiled as he watched his son work, a familiar ache spreading through his chest. Jason's intelligence was both a blessing and a constant reminder of what David had sacrificed. The career, the recognition, all the possibilities that had evaporated when he chose his son's welfare over professional vindication. Sometimes the most effective solutions aren't the most pleasant, David replied, setting a glass of water and 2 pills beside Jason's cereal bowl. But that doesn't mean we stop looking for better ways. Jason wrinkled his nose but dutifully swallowed the medication. The autoimmune condition that had appeared 2 years ago required strict management that cost more than David's previous health insurance had been willing to cover. Night security at Innovatech's Westfield Plaza wasn't glamorous, but it provided the comprehensive benefits Jason needed. David's phone buzzed with a text message from Jason's doctor. Another appointment had been scheduled, another specialist consulted, another bill that would stretch their budget to breaking point. As he drove Jason to school in their aging Honda, David couldn't shake the memory of Catherine Morgan sitting helpless in the rain, or Peterson's urgent call. The words security breach kept replaying in his mind, intertwined with memories of code and algorithms he'd spent years trying to forget. At Innovatech's gleaming headquarters, the morning carried the usual buzz of a corporate Monday. Catherine Morgan arrived at precisely 8 o'clock a.m., her composure fully restored. Designer heels clicked against marble floors as she crossed the lobby, employees nodding respectfully as she passed. If anyone had seen her intoxicated state 3 nights ago, there was no indication in her perfectly assembled exterior. Scott Palmer, the chief operating officer, intercepted her near the elevators. At 48, Scott represented Innovatech's old guard, the executives who had built the company before Catherine's arrival 5 years ago and who had watched her rapid rise with barely concealed resentment. "Catherine, we need to discuss the security concerns that came up over the weekend," Scott said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who believed problems should be solved through proper channels. He clutched a leather portfolio embossed with the company logo, each document inside arranged according to corporate protocols. "The vulnerability in Neuralink is more extensive than our team initially assessed. The board is concerned about potential liabilities if this goes public before the product launch next month." Catherine nodded absently, but her mind was elsewhere. The fragments of memory from Friday night were starting to coalesce. The security guard who had driven her home, the notification on her phone, the pounding headache that had greeted her Saturday morning, along with an urgent message from the cybersecurity team. "Have we identified the source of the vulnerability?" she asked, stepping into the elevator. Scott followed, pressing the button for the executive floor. "Not yet. Johnson thinks it might be a fundamental flaw in the neural interface protocol. If that's the case, we're looking at months of delays, not weeks." The elevator doors closed, sealing them in sleek, silent isolation as they ascended to the top floor. Catherine's reflection in the polished metal showed none of the turmoil churning beneath her surface. Neuralink was supposed to be Innovatech's breakthrough, a neural interface that would revolutionize how humans interacted with technology. The product launch was scheduled to coincide with the company's IPO. A security flaw now could sink everything she'd worked for. "Schedule an emergency meeting with the cybersecurity team for this afternoon," Catherine said as the elevator doors opened, "and get me everything we have on this vulnerability." As Scott departed toward his office, Catherine's assistant met her with a coffee and a tablet displaying her schedule. "Ms. Morgan, you have the investor call at 9, strategy meeting at 11, and lunch with the board at 1. "Cancel lunch with the board," Catherine replied, taking the coffee. "Tell them I'm working directly on the Neuralink situation." Alone in her office, a minimalist space of glass and steel that offered a panoramic view of the city, Catherine finally allowed her professional mask to slip. She sank into her chair, the weight of potential disaster settling on her shoulders like a physical presence. Neuralink wasn't just another product. It represented Innovatech's future and her own. As the company's first female CEO, Catherine had faced skepticism at every turn. The successful launch of Neuralink would silence her critics permanently. Its failure would confirm every doubt, every whispered suggestion that she had been promoted beyond her capabilities. Catherine opened her secure email, scanning through the technical reports from the weekend. The terminology was dense, filled with jargon that stretched the limits of her technical understanding. But one thing was clear. The vulnerability was severe, potentially allowing unauthorized access to users' neural data. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your personal email, by P." Catherine frowned, then opened her personal account on her tablet. A new message waited in her inbox, sent from an anonymous address. The vulnerability in Neuralink was identified 18 months ago by a former employee of Datrix Systems. Innovatech's current security team doesn't have the expertise to fix it before launch. "Find David Reeves, he knows." The name hit Catherine like a physical blow. David Reeves, the security guard from Friday night. The man who had witnessed her at her lowest, most vulnerable moment. With trembling fingers, Catherine pulled up the employee directory, searching for his name. David Reeves, night security, Westfield Plaza location, employed for 18 months. Prior employment history, incomplete. There was something about him that had seemed out of place. The way he had organized her scattered belongings in the car, the careful precision of his movements, the intelligence in his eyes that seemed at odds with his uniform. Catherine picked up her phone and dialed the head of human resources. "I need the complete employment file for David Reeves, night security at Westfield. I want everything, background check, previous employment, education, everything." An hour later, Catherine stared at the file on her desk, pieces falling into place with disturbing clarity. David Reeves, master's degree in computer science from MIT. former lead security architect at Datrix Systems, Innovatech's main competitor. Resigned abruptly 2 years ago during a corporate restructuring. No official employment until joining Innovatech as a security guard 18 months ago. The disconnect between his qualifications and current position was jarring. Why would a top-tier security architect take a job as a night guard? And why at Innovatech, of all places? Catherine's intercom buzzed. Ms. Morgan, the cybersecurity team is assembled in conference room A. Tell them I'll be there in 10 minutes, she replied, still staring at David's file. The cybersecurity meeting confirmed her worst fears. The vulnerability in Neuralink's protocol could potentially allow a sophisticated attacker to extract sensitive neural data from users, essentially reading their thoughts. The team's proposed solutions would require months of redevelopment, effectively killing their launch timeline. There has to be another way, Catherine insisted, pacing the length of the conference room. Something we're missing. Johnson, the head of cybersecurity, spread his hands in a gesture of defeat. This isn't a simple patch job, Ms. Morgan. The vulnerability is embedded in the fundamental architecture of the neural interface. We'd need someone who understands both the hardware and the encryption protocols at a level none of us do. Catherine stopped pacing. What about bringing in an outside consultant, someone with specialized experience in neural interface security? With all due respect, Scott interjected, finding someone with that specific expertise who isn't already working for our competitors would be nearly impossible. And bringing in an outsider this close to launch creates its own security risks. Catherine met his gaze steadily. I may have someone in mind. Later that evening, David walked through the empty corridors of Westfield Plaza, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The night shift had become a familiar routine, checking doors, monitoring security feeds, performing hourly walks through the deserted mall. It was mindless work that left his thoughts free to wander, often to places he'd rather not go. His phone vibrated in his pocket, another text from Jason's science teacher. His son had attempted to redesign the classroom's ventilation system, claiming it would improve air quality and student concentration. The teacher's message was polite but firm. Jason needed to focus on being a fifth grader, not an environmental engineer. David sighed, typing a quick apology. Jason's brilliance was becoming harder to contain within the confines of a standard classroom, another problem without an easy solution. As he rounded the corner toward the food court, David noticed a figure sitting alone at one of the tables. His hand instinctively moved toward the taser on his belt before recognition dawned. Catherine Morgan sat primly on a plastic chair, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than David's monthly rent. Her posture was rigid, hands clasped on the table before her like a student awaiting examination. Ms. Morgan, David said, approaching cautiously. The mall is closed to the public. I'm aware, she replied, her voice carrying none of the vulnerability from Friday night. I came to speak with you, Mr. Reeves, or should I say, Lead Security Architect Reeves. The title hit David like a physical blow, memories flooding back of a life he'd left behind. His expression remained neutral, but his pulse quickened. I'm just a security guard now. A security guard with a master's from MIT and 8 years' experience designing encryption protocols for neural interfaces? Catherine countered. A security guard who previously worked for our main competitor, Datrix Systems, until your abrupt resignation 2 years ago. David's jaw tightened. If you've come to fire me for failing to disclose my full employment history, I'd appreciate if you'd just get it over with. My shift ends at 7, and Jason needs breakfast before school. Jason, Catherine repeated, your son, 10 years old, diagnosed with juvenile autoimmune disorder 2 years ago. She noted David's eyes narrowing and added, yes, I did my research. Just as I'm sure you've done yours on Innovatech's current situation. David remained silent, his face unreadable. Catherine leaned forward slightly. I'm not here to fire you, Mr. Reeves. I'm here to offer you your real job. I already have a bomb, David replied coldly. One that provides health insurance for my son. A job far beneath your capabilities, Catherine pressed. And I suspect you know exactly why I'm here. The vulnerability in Neuralink's neural interface protocol, the same vulnerability you identified at Datrix Systems before your resignation. David's expression flickered. Surprise. quickly masked. What makes you think I know anything about that? Because you tried to warn Datrix about it 2 years ago, and instead of listening, they forced you out, Catherine said, playing her ace. Because the anonymous email I received this morning came from someone who knows both you and the technical details of our situation. And because you've been working at Innovatech for exactly as long as we've been developing Neuralink. She placed a tablet on the table between them, displaying technical specifications. Our cybersecurity team estimates it would take months to redesign the protocol. We don't have months. The vulnerability puts our users at risk of having their neural data compromised. I need someone who understands the problem intimately. David stared at the specifications, muscle memory from his previous life already identifying potential solutions. He fought the urge to reach for the tablet. Why would I help Innovatech? He asked, voice low. When I found this vulnerability at Datrix, I was called paranoid, accused of exaggerating threats to justify a bigger security budget. When I persisted, they suggested I was disloyal, possibly working for competitors. His laugh was hollow. Ironic, considering where I ended up. I'm not asking you to be loyal to Innovatech, Catherine replied. I'm asking you to prevent a security catastrophe that could affect thousands of users, and to be loyal to yourself, to the work you were meant to do. David's eyes met hers, searching for deception. And what do I get out of this arrangement? Triple your current salary for starters, Catherine said promptly. Consultant status, reporting directly to me. Full benefits maintained, of course. And access to Innovatech's research partnership with Boston Children's Hospital, which has one of the leading juvenile autoimmune research programs in the country. The last item landed like a stone in still water, ripples of possibilities spreading through David's carefully controlled expression. For Jason, he would consider almost anything. How do you know I can even solve this problem? He asked, a final resistance. Catherine's lips curved in a slight smile. Because you already have. The protocol modification you proposed at Datrix, the one they rejected, would have addressed the exact vulnerability we're facing now. David's eyebrows rose slightly. You have access to Datrix's internal security proposals? Let's just say information finds its way to those who value it properly, Catherine replied smoothly. So, Mr. Reeves, do we have a deal? Can you fix our problem? David was silent for a long moment, weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, he spoke. I'll need complete access to the Neuralink architecture. No restrictions, no oversight committees, no approval chains. Done. And my work remains confidential. No one knows my background or my connection to Datrix. Agreed. And Jason's medical care takes priority. If he needs me, I'm gone. No questions asked. Catherine extended her hand across the table. We have a deal, Mr. Reeves. David hesitated before taking her hand. Her grip was firm, confident, so different from the vulnerable woman he'd helped into his car 3 nights ago. One more thing, David said, releasing her hand. Why did you really come to me? You could have hired any number of security consultants with the right credentials. Catherine's professional mask slipped just slightly, revealing something more genuine beneath. Because you were kind when you didn't have to be. Because you saw me at my worst and chose discretion. And because I believe in second chances for both of us, both. Before David could respond, his phone buzzed again. This time, he checked the screen immediately. The hospital. About Jason. I have to go, he said, already moving toward the exit. Family emergency. Catherine nodded, understanding in her eyes. Go. We'll continue this tomorrow. As David rushed toward the parking garage, Peterson's words from Friday night echoed in his mind. This is bigger than corporate espionage now. The weight of the decision he'd just made pressed against his chest, constricting his breathing. He was stepping back into a world he'd sworn to leave behind, making deals with the very industry that had destroyed his career. For Jason's sake, he told himself. Always for Jason. But as he started his car, David couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. That Catherine Morgan's appearance in his life was not the coincidence it seemed. The night guard and the CEO, now bound together by secrets neither fully understood. And somewhere in the digital shadows, unseen eyes watched them both, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The pediatric ward of Oakwood Memorial Hospital hummed with the quiet efficiency of night shift operations. David sat beside Jason's bed, watching his son's chest rise and fall with each breath. The asthma attack had been severe, triggered by a combination of stress and the changing season, but the doctors had stabilized him quickly. Jason slept now, his face peaceful despite the oxygen tube beneath his nose. In sleep, he looked younger than his 10 years, vulnerable in a way that twisted David's heart. "Mr. Reeves?" David looked up to see Dr. Winters, Jason's specialist, standing in the doorway. The doctor's expression was carefully neutral, but David had become adept at reading the subtle cues of medical professionals. Something was wrong. "Could we speak outside?" Dr. Winters asked, gesturing toward the hallway. With a final glance at Jason, David followed the doctor out of the room. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor cast harsh shadows across both their faces. "Jason's condition is progressing more rapidly than we anticipated," Dr. Winters said, keeping his voice low. "The new treatment protocol isn't producing the results we hope for." David's throat tightened. "What are our options?" "There's an experimental treatment being developed at Boston Children's. Early results are promising for cases like Jason's." Dr. Winters hesitated. "However, it's still in clinical trials. Insurance won't cover it, and the out-of-pocket costs are substantial." "How substantial?" David asked, already knowing the answer would be beyond his reach. "The initial treatment course would be approximately $175,000. The figure hung in the air between them, an impossible sum. "I understand this is difficult news," Dr. Winters continued. "There are some patient assistance programs we can apply for, but I wanted you to have all the information." David nodded mechanically, thanking the doctor while his mind raced through calculations, possibilities, scenarios, none of which ended with him finding that kind of money. Except one. Catherine Morgan's offer now took on new significance. The consultant position, the connection to Boston Children's Hospital, the chance to give Jason access to cutting-edge treatment. As he returned to Jason's bedside, David made his decision. Whatever game Catherine was playing, whatever secrets lay beneath the surface of her offer, he would accept the risk. For Jason, he would do anything, even step back into the shadows of his past. Morning light filtered through the hospital blinds when David's phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. "Ready to begin? Access credentials await. CM." David looked at his sleeping son, then typed his reply. "I'm in, but on my terms." The response came immediately. "Of course, your office is ready." Innovatech's research facility occupied the top 3 floors of their downtown headquarters. Unlike the sleek, open design of their corporate offices below, the research division was a labyrinth of secure labs, server rooms, and specialized workspaces. The air hummed with the sound of powerful computers and cooling systems. David stood in the private office Catherine had assigned him, taking in the state-of-the-art equipment, the panoramic view of the city, and the absolute isolation from the rest of the team. A deliberate choice, he suspected, keeping the night guard turned consultant away from curious eyes. The door opened and Catherine entered, dressed in a navy suit that conveyed authority without ostentation. "How's your son?" she asked, closing the door behind her. "Stable," David replied, surprised by the genuine concern in her voice. "They're releasing him this afternoon." Catherine nodded. "I've arranged for a car service to take him home when he's ready. I assume you'll want to get started right away." David gestured to the computers. "I already have. Your security team did a decent job documenting the vulnerability, but they've missed the deeper issue." "Which is?" "The neural interface doesn't just have a vulnerability, it has a backdoor." David pulled up a complex schematic on the main monitor. Someone deliberately built in access points that bypass the security protocols. This isn't an oversight or a design flaw. It's intentional. Catherine's expression hardened. "Are you suggesting corporate espionage?" "I'm stating facts," David replied coolly. "These access points are sophisticated, hidden beneath layers of legitimate code. Your team didn't find them because they weren't looking for deliberate sabotage. Who would have the expertise to implement something like this?" David met her gaze directly. "At Innovatech? Maybe 3 or 4 people. The same would be true at Datrix. Neural interface security is a specialized field." "Could you have done it?" Catherine asked bluntly. A humorless smile crossed David's face. "Technically, yes, but since I've been checking IDs at Westfield Plaza for the past 18 months, My opportunity was somewhat limited. Catherine paced the length of the office, heels clicking against the polished concrete floor. How long will it take you to close these back doors? That depends on how deep they go. David turned back to the monitors. I'll need to audit the entire code base, layer by layer. Could be days, could be weeks. We don't have weeks, Catherine said, tension evident in her voice. The board is already nervous about delays. If word gets out about deliberate sabotage, investor confidence will collapse before we even go public. David's fingers flew across the keyboard, diving deeper into the code. Then we'd better hope the saboteur didn't cover their tracks too carefully. Catherine watched him work for a moment, struck by the transformation. Gone was the reserve security guard, replaced by a focused professional navigating complex systems with practiced ease. This was David Reeves in his natural element, and it was clear he was exceptional. I'll leave you to it, she said finally. Use whatever resources you need. Report directly to me, no one else. As she turned to leave, David spoke without looking away from the screen. There's something you're not telling me, Miss Morgan. Something about why you really sought me out. Catherine paused at the door, her back to him. Focus on finding the back doors, Mr. Reeves, one problem at a time. After she left, David leaned back in his chair, processing what he'd just discovered. The back doors in Neuralink's protocol were sophisticated but familiar, almost like looking at his own handwriting from years ago. The techniques, the approach, the subtle signatures in the code. He pulled out his phone and dialed Peterson's number. I need to know exactly what you know about Innovatech's security breach, David said when Peterson answered. And I need to know now. Peterson's voice was tense. You're working with them now, aren't you? I wondered how long it would take. Cut the cryptic warnings, Peterson. I'm trying to close security holes that could compromise neural data for thousands of people. Those security holes go deeper than you realize, Peterson replied. What did Morgan tell you about Project Nexus? David frowned. Nothing. What's Project Nexus? A long pause. Meet me tonight, Riverside Park, near the boathouse. 8 p.m. Don't tell anyone, especially not Morgan. The line went dead, leaving David with more questions than answers. He turned back to the monitors, diving deeper into Neuralink's architecture, searching for clues. The code spoke to him in a language more familiar than his mother tongue, logical, precise, revealing patterns that others would miss. By late afternoon, he had mapped most of the back doors, confirming his initial suspicion. This was professional work, executed by someone with intimate knowledge of both neural interfaces and Innovatech's security protocols. An alert popped up on his phone. Jason had been discharged from the hospital. As promised, Catherine had arranged a car service to take him home. David texted his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, asking if she could stay with Jason until he returned. As he prepared to leave for his meeting with Peterson, David copied key portions of the code to his secure tablet. Something about this situation felt increasingly dangerous. The deliberate backdoors, Peterson's urgent warnings, Catherine's selective transparency. He was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle, and he suspected the answers might shatter the fragile new arrangement he'd made with Catherine Morgan. But for Jason's sake, he needed to know exactly what he'd gotten himself into. The autumn sun was setting as David left Innovatech's headquarters, casting long shadows across the plaza. He didn't notice the dark sedan that pulled away from the curb after him, nor the camera that tracked his departure. In the digital shadows, the first moves of a dangerous game had been made, and neither David nor Catherine fully understood the rules, or the true identity of their opponent. Riverside Park was nearly deserted at 8 p.m., the cooling October air driving most visitors indoors. David walked along the path toward the boathouse, senses alert for any sign of surveillance. Years in security had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now every instinct warned of danger. Peterson was already waiting, a lean figure in a dark jacket, tension evident in his posture. At 43, James Peterson had the haunted look of a man carrying too many secrets for too long. They had worked together at Datrix for 5 years, building security systems designed to be impenetrable. You're taking a risk coming here, Peterson said by way of greeting. Morgan will have you watched. I can handle Catherine Morgan, David replied. What I can't handle is being kept in the dark while trying to fix potentially catastrophic security issues. What's Project Nexus, and how does it connect to the backdoors in Neuralink? Peterson glanced around before responding, his voice low. Project Nexus was a classified government initiative to develop neural interface technology for intelligence applications. Both Datrix and Innovatech were contractors, competing for the main development rights. David's eyes narrowed. Intelligence applications? You mean surveillance? Among other things, Peterson nodded. The ability to extract thoughts directly from a target's mind, to implant suggestions, to monitor neural patterns without detection. The perfect espionage tool. That's theoretical at best, David argued. Current neural interface technology isn't sophisticated enough for that kind of application. It wasn't, Peterson agreed, until someone made a breakthrough about 2 years ago. Someone who understood both the hardware and encryption protocols at a level nobody else did. The implication hung in the air between them. I never worked on anything like that, David said firmly. My research at Datrix was focused on security, on protecting users from exactly this kind of intrusion. I know, Peterson replied. That's why they forced you out. Your security protocols would have prevented the backdoor access they needed for Project Nexus. When you identified the vulnerability, you became a liability. David processed this information, pieces falling into place. And now Innovatech has the same vulnerability in Neuralink. You think they're also involved with Project Nexus? I don't think I know, Peterson said grimly. After you left Datrix, the project shifted to Innovatech. Catherine Morgan personally oversaw the transition. The revelation hit David like a physical blow. Catherine had sought him out not to fix the vulnerability, but to understand how he had identified it, to ensure their backdoors remained functional while appearing to address security concerns. I need proof, David said, mind racing through implications. Documentation, communications, something concrete. Peterson reached into his jacket and pulled out a small drive. Everything I could gather is here. Access logs, project transfers, communication between Innovatech and military contractors. But be careful, this information got 2 people at Datrix killed in accidents last year. As David reached for the drive, a sharp crack echoed across the park, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Peterson's eyes widened in shock and pain as a dark stain spread across his chest. David lunged forward, catching Peterson as he collapsed. James, take it, Peterson gasped, pressing the drive into David's hand. Warn them, not just corporate, danger to everyone. Another shot rang out, splintering the wooden bench beside them. David dragged Peterson behind a concrete planter, searching desperately for the shooter. Stay with me, James, David urged, applying pressure to the wound. Who's behind this? Who else knows? Peterson's breathing grew labored, his voice barely audible. Trust no one, especially Morgan. She knows about Jason. The mention of his son's name sent ice through David's veins. What about Jason? What does she know? But Peterson's eyes had gone distant, his body limp. David checked for a pulse, finding nothing. More shots struck the planter, sending concrete fragments flying. Survival instinct took over. David pocketed the drive and staying low, using the park's landscaping as cover. Behind him, he heard shouts, footsteps, the sound of pursuit. As he reached the street, David blended into a group of evening pedestrians, heart pounding in his chest. He needed to get to Jason, to ensure his son's safety. Then he would deal with Catherine Morgan and whatever deadly game she had drawn him into. His phone buzzed with an incoming text. Catherine's number. Where are you? We have a breakthrough on the Neuralink situation. Need you back at the office immediately. David stared at the message, Peterson's warning echoing in his mind. Trust no one, especially Morgan. The night that had started with professional collaboration had transformed into something far more dangerous. Peterson was dead. Unknown assailants were in pursuit. And somewhere in the web of deception surrounding Project Nexus lay a threat to his son. For the first time in years, David felt the cold calculation of his security architect mindset take over. Assessing threats, planning countermeasures, identifying vulnerabilities. Only now, the system he needed to protect wasn't code or data. It was his life, and Jason's. He typed a response to Catherine. On my way. Sometimes to uncover the truth, you had to step deeper into the darkness. And David Reeves was prepared to descend as far as necessary to protect what mattered most, even if it meant confronting the woman who now held both their futures in her perfectly manicured hands. The game had changed. The stakes were life and death, and the true nature of Catherine Morgan's interest in him was about to be revealed, whether she intended it or not. Hidden Potential Part 2. Challenges and Division. Innovatech's headquarters stood like a gleaming sentinel against the night sky, its glass facade reflecting the city lights in fractured patterns. David approached the building with calculated caution, every sense heightened after Peterson's murder. The drive containing classified information felt impossibly heavy in his pocket, a digital Pandora's box that had already cost one life tonight. The security guard at the main entrance nodded to David, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Ms. Morgan said to send you up immediately, Mr. Reeves. She's waiting in the research lab." David forced a casual nod, maintaining his cover while his mind raced through scenarios. If Catherine was connected to Peterson's death, walking into the building might be walking into a trap, but staying away would alert her to his suspicions and potentially endanger Jason. The elevator ascended swiftly to the research floor, each passing second allowing David to compose himself, to bury the horror of watching Peterson die beneath a mask of professional detachment. By the time the doors opened, he had his expression under perfect control, a skill honed through years of high-stakes security negotiations. Catherine stood at the main console in the otherwise empty lab, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, her face illuminated by the blue glow of multiple screens. She looked up as David entered, relief visibly washing over her features. "There you are," she said, gesturing him over. "We've identified something unusual in the neural interface code. I thought you should see it immediately." David approached cautiously, maintaining a careful distance. "What did you find?" Catherine tapped several keys, bringing up a segment of code that David recognized immediately, part of the backdoor architecture he'd been mapping earlier. "This section contains an embedded protocol that activates only when specific neural patterns are detected," Catherine explained. "Our team initially missed it because it's disguised as a routine error handling function, but it's actually a sophisticated monitoring system." David studied the code, genuine professional interest temporarily overriding his suspicion. The implementation was elegant, almost artistic in its complexity, and disturbingly familiar. "Who found this?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "I did," Catherine replied, a hint of pride in her voice. "Before I became CEO, I headed Innovatech's encryption division. I still keep my hand in when something interesting comes up." This revelation added another layer to the puzzle. Catherine Morgan, CEO, technical expert, possibly connected to classified intelligence projects, and potentially involved in Peterson's murder. The woman was becoming more dangerous and more enigmatic by the hour. "It's impressive work," David acknowledged, referring to the code. "Whoever designed this knew exactly what they were doing." "That's what concerns me," Catherine said, turning to face him fully. "Only a handful of people in the world have this level of expertise in neural interface security. You're one of them." The accusation hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. David met her gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "If you're suggesting I had something to do with this, you're mistaken," he said coldly. "I haven't worked on neural interfaces since leaving Datrix 2 years ago. As you well know, I've been checking IDs and watching security monitors." Catherine studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth in his eyes. "Where were you tonight, David? When I called, you didn't answer." The use of his first name, intimate, unexpected, caught him off guard. "I had personal business to attend to, concerning Jason." It wasn't technically a lie, but the omission of Peterson's death felt like one. David watched Catherine's reaction carefully, looking for any sign that she knew about the meeting, about the shooting. "Is everything all right with your son?" she asked, her concern appearing genuine. "He's stable," David replied, maintaining his guard. "The hospital discharged him this afternoon. Thank you for arranging the car service." Catherine nodded, then turned back to the monitors. "So what do you make of this code? Can you modify the neural interface to eliminate these backdoors without compromising functionality?" "Possibly," David said, stepping closer to examine the screens. "But I'd need to understand the original architecture better. Who designed the core neural interface protocol for Neuralink? Dr. Eliza Chen, Catherine answered. She joined us from Stanford's neural engineering lab about 3 years ago. Brilliant, but somewhat unconventional in her approaches. I'd like to speak with her, David said, already formulating his next move. If Dr. Chen had designed the original architecture, she might know who had implemented the backdoors, and potentially their connection to Project Nexus. Catherine hesitated. Dr. Chen is currently on sabbatical, family emergency in Singapore. She's been gone for about 2 weeks and isn't expected back until after the product launch. The timing seemed suspiciously convenient. Do you have her contact information? I could speak with her remotely. I'll see what I can arrange, Catherine said, her tone suggesting the conversation on that topic was over. In the meantime, I've set up a secure workstation for you in the auxiliary lab. Complete isolation from our main network, as you requested. As they walked through the empty research floor, David's mind worked furiously, processing everything he'd learned. Peterson's warning, the backdoors in the neural interface, Catherine's technical background, Dr. Chen's convenient absence, pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. You never mention your background in encryption, David remarked casually. That seems relevant to our current situation. Catherine's steps didn't falter. There are many things we haven't mentioned to each other, Mr. Reeves, like why a top security architect would take a position as a night guard, or why you've been secretly researching Innovatech's neural interface patents for the past 18 months. David stopped walking, the revelation landing like a physical blow. You've been monitoring me. Catherine turned to face him, her expression unreadable. Just as you've been investigating us. Let's not pretend either of us came to this arrangement with clean hands or complete transparency. For a moment, they stood in silent confrontation, the air between them charged with unspoken accusations and dangerous secrets. I think it's time we put our cards on the table, David said finally. What exactly do you want from me, Karen? Because fixing security vulnerabilities seems like only part of the agenda. What I want is to protect my company and its users, she replied, her voice hardening. Neuralink represents a technological breakthrough that will change how humans interact with machines. If it fails because of security concerns, the setback to the field would be immeasurable. In Project Nexus? David asked bluntly, watching her reaction closely. How does that factor into your concerns? Catherine's expression flickered, surprise quickly masked by caution. Where did you hear that name? Does it matter? It matters a great deal, she said quietly, especially if you heard it from James Peterson. The confirmation that she knew Peterson sent a chill down David's spine. And if I did? Catherine glanced around the empty corridor, then stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Then you're in more danger than you realize. Peterson was under investigation for selling classified information to foreign entities. If he's been in contact with you, you may already be compromised. The claim contradicted everything David knew about Peterson, a man who had risked and ultimately lost his life to expose what he believed was a dangerous conspiracy. That's convenient, David replied coldly, discrediting the messenger when the message becomes problematic. I'm trying to protect you, Catherine insisted, genuine urgency in her voice. Peterson was involved in things you don't understand, things that could put both you and Jason at risk. The mention of his son again, a pressure point Catherine seemed all too aware of. David's jaw tightened. I think I understand more than you realize, he said, and I think it's time for me to go home and check on my son. Catherine reached out, her hand closing around his wrist with surprising strength. David, please. Whatever Peterson told you, whatever you think you know, it's not the complete picture. Stay, work with me on this. I promise you'll understand everything soon. Her touch sent an unexpected current through him, not just physical awareness, but a complex resonance of danger and connection. David extricated his wrist from her grip, maintaining his composure with effort. I'll be back in the morning, he said firmly. We can continue this discussion then. Catherine seemed about to protest, then nodded reluctantly. First thing tomorrow. And David, be careful tonight. There are players in this situation who won't hesitate to eliminate perceived threats. The warning could have been genuine concern or a veiled threat. In the shadowy world he'd re-entered, The line between ally and enemy had blurred beyond recognition. As David left the building, his phone vibrated with a text from Mrs. Chen. Jason asking when you'll be home. Fever returned, not emergency but concerning. His heart rate accelerated. Jason's condition often worsened under stress, and the day's events would have been stressful even for an adult. David quickened his pace, scanning the street for any sign of surveillance or threat. The drive containing Peterson's evidence felt like a burning coal in his pocket. He needed to review its contents, to understand exactly what he'd stumbled into, but not at his apartment, not anywhere that might put Jason at risk. For now, his priority was his son. The deadly game of secrets and lies would have to wait until morning. David's apartment building stood in stark contrast to Catherine's luxury high-rise, a modest structure in a working-class neighborhood where security consisted of a temperamental front door lock and hallway lights that worked most of the time. He took the stairs instead of the unreliable elevator, mind still processing the night's revelations. Mrs. Chen met him at the door to his apartment, concern etched in her kind face. Jason's fever is 101.2, she reported quietly. He took his medication an hour ago and finally fell asleep about 20 minutes ago. Thank you for staying with him, David said gratefully, handing her the payment they'd agreed upon. I don't know what we'd do without you. The elderly woman waved away his words. Jason is a good boy, very smart, always teaching me interesting things. She hesitated, then added, he was worried about you tonight, said you were in danger. Fever dreams, maybe? A cold feeling settled in David's stomach. Probably just anxiety from the hospital stay, he replied, keeping his voice casual. Kids pick up on more than we realize. After Mrs. Chen left, David went directly to Jason's room. His son lay curled on his side, dark hair damp with sweat against his forehead, breathing slightly labored but steady. David gently placed a hand on Jason's cheek, feeling the heat of fever. Dad? Jason murmured, eyes fluttering open. I'm here, David said softly. How are you feeling, buddy bear? Better now. Jason's voice was drowsy from medication. Did you fix the problem at work? The one with the brain computer? David froze. What do you mean? Jason shifted, struggling to focus through his fever. The lady who called, she said you were fixing a computer that connects to people's brains. She said it was very important. What lady, Jason? David asked, fighting to keep his voice calm while alarm bells screamed in his mind. When did she call? Today, when I got home from the hospital. Jason's eyes were already closing again, medication pulling him back toward sleep. She knew all about my condition. Said you were helping her company make things that could help me get better. David sat perfectly still beside his son's bed, cold fury replacing his initial shock. Catherine, or someone connected to her, had contacted Jason directly, had used his medical condition as leverage. The violation felt intensely personal, threatening the one area of his life he'd tried to keep separate from the darkness of his past. After ensuring Jason was deeply asleep, David went to the kitchen and removed a loose tile beneath the sink, retrieving a small waterproof case. Inside was a secure laptop he'd maintained for emergencies, completely isolated from any network, impossible to trace or hack remotely. He inserted Peterson's drive, bracing himself for whatever secrets it might contain. 2 hours later, David sat motionless at the kitchen table, the evidence laid bare before him. Project Nexus was far more than corporate espionage or military intelligence gathering. It was a systematic attempt to develop technology that could directly influence neural pathways, not just reading thoughts, but potentially controlling them. The documents detailed experiments, test subjects, success rates. Datrix had developed the initial interface. Innovatech had refined it to increase precision and reduce detection. And behind both companies stood a shadowy governmental entity identified only as Division. Most disturbing were the clinical trials data, showing test subjects experiencing memory alterations, behavioral modifications, and in some cases, neurological damage. The research had progressed despite clear ethical violations and evidence of harm. And there, in the project leadership documentation, was Catherine Morgan's name, listed as technical advisor on neural encryption. She hadn't just known about Project Nexus, she had been instrumental in its development. The revelation confirmed David's worst fears. Neuralink wasn't simply a consumer product with security flaws. It was potentially a Trojan horse designed to collect neural data from users while establishing pathways for future influence. And he had been brought in not to fix security vulnerabilities, but to assess whether he might expose the true purpose of the technology. David closed the files and removed the drive, returning it to its secure hiding place. Then he checked on Jason once more, relieved to find his fever had reduced slightly. Standing in the doorway of his son's room, David made his decision. He would continue working with Catherine, would maintain the pretense of cooperation, but his true mission now was to gather evidence and expose Project Nexus before Neuralink could be released to the public. The risks were enormous, but the alternative was unthinkable. His phone buzzed with a text message. Progress on our project? Need update. CM. Even at this hour, Catherine was monitoring his activities, applying subtle pressure. David typed a careful response. Working on solution. Will demonstrate tomorrow, 9 a.m. The reply came immediately. Looking forward to it. Stay safe. The concern in those final two words might have seemed genuine if David hadn't just spent hours reading about Catherine's involvement in experimental neural manipulation. Now they felt like a threat wrapped in solicitude, a reminder that he was being watched. As he prepared for bed, exhaustion finally catching up with him, David's thoughts returned to the moment in the corridor when Catherine had grasped his wrist. Despite everything he now knew about her, there had been something in her touch, in her eyes, that suggested complexity beyond simple deception. Catherine Morgan was dangerous, that much was certain. But whether she was a willing architect of Project Nexus or a participant with her own hidden agenda remained unclear. Tomorrow would bring them face to face again, each armed with secrets and suspicions. And somewhere in that dangerous dance of half-truths lay the key to stopping a technology that could fundamentally threaten human autonomy. David's last thought before sleep claimed him was of Peterson's final warning. Trust no one, especially Morgan. She knows about Jason. The game had only just begun. Morning arrived with the harsh buzz of David's alarm. He'd slept barely 4 hours, but adrenaline and determination pushed him into immediate alertness. Jason's fever had broken during the night. His condition improved enough that he insisted on going to school. I have a science presentation today, he explained earnestly over breakfast, about neural networks. I can't miss it. The coincidence sent a chill through David. Neural networks? When did you start studying those? Jason shrugged, pushing cereal around his bowl. A couple weeks ago, Ms. Wilson suggested it for my independent project. Said it matched my interest. David made a mental note to investigate Jason's teacher more thoroughly. After the revelations of the previous night, coincidences felt increasingly like coordination. Dad, are you okay? Jason asked, his perceptive eyes catching David's tension. You seem worried. David forced a smile. Just thinking about work, new project, lots of pressure. Is it for the brain-computer lady? Jason asked innocently. Something like that, David replied, maintaining his casual tone while his mind raced. Hey, how about we go to the Science Museum this weekend? They have a new exhibit on artificial intelligence. Jason's face lit up, his illness momentarily forgotten in the excitement of their shared interest. Really? Can we go to the robotics demonstration too? Absolutely, David promised, treasuring the moment of normalcy amid the gathering storm. It's a date. After walking Jason to school, double-checking that he had all his medications, David headed to Innovatech with renewed purpose. He had prepared a modified version of the neural interface code overnight, one that appeared to maintain the backdoor functionality while actually implementing subtle safeguards that would alert users to any unauthorized access attempts. It was a dangerous gambit. If Catherine or her technical team discovered his deception, the consequences could be severe. But it was the only way to buy time while he gathered more evidence about Project Nexus. The Innovatech lobby hummed with morning activity as David crossed to the executive elevators, keenly aware of the curious glances from employees who wondered who this unfamiliar man with high-level access might be. Scott Palmer intercepted him near the elevator bank, his imposing figure blocking David's path with deliberate authority. At close range, Palmer's expensive suit and carefully maintained appearance couldn't disguise the calculated assessment in his eyes. You must be the consultant Catherine brought in, Palmer said, extending his hand. Scott Palmer, Chief Operating Officer. David shook the offered hand, noting the excessive pressure Palmer applied. A primitive dominance display. David Reeves, I'm assisting with some technical aspects of the Neuralink project. Interesting, Palmer replied, maintaining his position to prevent David from reaching the elevators. Catherine hasn't shared much about your background or qualifications. Rather unusual for such a critical project. I believe Ms. Morgan values results over credentials, David said evenly. Speaking of which, I have a meeting with her in 5 minutes. Palmer's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course, I wouldn't want to keep you, but perhaps we could schedule some time to discuss your insights on the project. I like to stay informed about all aspects of operations. The request was framed as collegial interest, but David recognized it for what it was. Surveillance, information gathering. Palmer was either suspicious of David's sudden appearance or positioning himself in the corporate power structure. I'd be happy to meet once I've completed my initial assessment, David replied diplomatically. Ms. Morgan can coordinate our schedules. Palmer nodded, stepping aside with reluctance that bordered on insubordination. I'll look forward to it. Welcome to Innovatech, Mr. Reeves. As the elevator doors closed between them, David filed the interaction away for further analysis. Palmer represented another variable in an already complex equation, possibly connected to Project Nexus, possibly just a territorial executive protecting his domain. Catherine was waiting in the secure lab, reviewing data on multiple screens with intense concentration. She wore a charcoal suit that emphasized her authority, while her hair was arranged in a more relaxed style than the previous day. Small inconsistencies that might have been meaningless or might have been calculated to put him at ease. You're late, she said without looking up. Unexpected meeting with Scott Palmer in the lobby, David replied, observing her reaction closely. Catherine's fingers paused momentarily on the keyboard. What did Scott want? To establish dominance primarily, David said, moving to his workstation, and to gather information about my role here. A hint of a smile touched Catherine's lips. Accurate assessment. Scott doesn't appreciate variables he can't control. She turned to face him fully. Like you. David met her gaze steadily. I'm not here to disrupt your corporate hierarchy, Catherine. I'm here to fix a security problem. Are you? She asked quietly. Because our conversation yesterday suggested you might have broader concerns. Project Nexus, for instance. The direct acknowledgement surprised him. David had expected continued deflection, not confrontation. He decided to match her directness. Project Nexus represents a fundamental ethical breach in neural interface technology, he said, watching her carefully. Using Neuralink as a delivery system for neural monitoring and potential influence without user consent isn't just illegal, it's unconscionable. Catherine's expression remained perfectly composed, but David detected a slight increase in her breathing rate, a tightening around her eyes. That's a serious accusation of David. One that could be dangerous to make without substantial evidence. Like the evidence James Peterson gathered before he was murdered last night? The words hung in the air between them, a direct challenge that couldn't be withdrawn or ignored. David had just revealed his knowledge of Peterson's death, and potentially his possession of the incriminating drive. Catherine's reaction would tell him everything he needed to know about her involvement. For several seconds, she remained completely still, her expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, relief seemed to wash over her features. Thank God, she whispered, the corporate mask slipping to reveal something raw beneath. You know, before David could process this response, Catherine moved to the door and engaged an additional security lock, then returned to her workstation and activated what appeared to be a signal jammer. We don't have much time, she said urgently, her voice lower now. If Peterson contacted you, then you're already on their radar. The same people who killed him will target you next. David maintained his guard, suspicious of this apparent revelation. And who exactly are they, Catherine? Because Peterson's evidence points directly to Innovatech, and to you personally. Catherine closed her eyes briefly, tension visible in every line of her body. I know how it looks. I can't deny my involvement in the early stages of Project Nexus. But the project that exists now is not what I signed up for. Explain, David demanded, unwilling to accept vague assurances. Project Nexus began as a defensive technology, Catherine said, her words coming faster now. A way to protect against emerging neural hacking threats. I developed encryption protocols designed to secure neural interfaces against unauthorized access. That was 3 years ago. She moved to a secure terminal, typing rapidly. 6 months into development, the military applications became apparent. Division, the government entity funding the research, shifted focus from protection to exploitation. I objected and was gradually moved to a peripheral role. Yet you still appear in the project leadership documentation, David pointed out, as recently as 6 months ago. Because I never formally withdrew, Catherine acknowledged. I needed to maintain access to monitor what they were doing with my work. When they transferred the project from Datrix to Innovatech, I engineered my promotion to CEO specifically to gain oversight. David remained skeptical. That's a convenient narrative, one that positions you as an unwilling participant rather than a key architect. I understand your suspicion, Catherine said, her composure returning. In your position, I'd feel the same. But consider this. If I were fully aligned with Project Nexus, why would I bring you in? Your history of identifying and exposing the exact vulnerabilities they're exploiting makes you their worst nightmare. The question was logical, forcing David to reconsider his assumptions. Perhaps to assess how much I know, to neutralize a potential threat. Or perhaps because I need someone with your expertise to help me stop them, Catherine countered. Someone who has demonstrated both the technical skills and the ethical framework to recognize why this technology can't be allowed to proceed. She pulled up a secure file on her terminal. This is the current iteration of Project Nexus, developed without my input or approval. The neural influence capabilities go far beyond what I believe possible. They're not just monitoring thoughts. They're testing methods to implant them. David examined the technical specifications with growing horror. The back doors he'd identified in Neuralink were more sophisticated than he'd initially recognized, designed not just for data extraction, but for bi-directional neural communication. If this technology deploys with Neuralink, it creates the infrastructure for unprecedented privacy violations, Catherine continued, and potentially for mass manipulation. That's why I sought you out, David, not because you drove me home one night, but because your work at Datrix demonstrated that you understood these risks before anyone else. The scenario she presented was plausible, perhaps even likely, but years in security had taught David to verify, never to trust based on words alone. If what you're saying is true, he said carefully, then you're taking an enormous risk by confiding in me. Why now? Why not when we first met? Catherine's expression hardened. Because I needed to be certain of your position. Peterson's death confirms that Division is eliminating anyone who threatens to expose Project Nexus. By telling you the truth, I'm potentially signing my own death warrant. Or setting me up, David countered, creating a paper trail that frames me as the conspirator if things go wrong. A flash of frustration crossed Catherine's face. What would it take to convince you, David? What proof would you accept? David considered the question seriously. Access to Dr. Eliza Chen, the original architect of Neuralink's neural interface. If she corroborates your story, I might be inclined to believe you. Eliza is in protective custody, Catherine replied grimly. When she discovered how her work was being modified, she threatened to go public. Division arranged her sabbatical to keep her contained. You said she was in Singapore, family emergency. That's the official story, Catherine acknowledged. The reality is that she's being held at a Division facility outside Portland, officially for psychiatric evaluation following a stress-related breakdown. David processed this information, re-evaluating the puzzle with each new piece. If you're truly working against Project Nexus, why not go public? Take the evidence to the press or regulatory authorities. Because Division has infiltrated both, Catherine said, frustration evident in her voice. And because going public without a solution would only delay the project, not end it. We need to do more than expose Nexus. We need to render the entire approach technologically unfeasible. She stepped closer, intensity radiating from her. That's why I need you, David. Together, we can develop security protocols that make neural manipulation impossible, regardless of what Division wants. We can build safeguards directly into the architecture that can't be removed without destroying functionality. The technical challenge she described was exactly the work David had been passionate about at Datrix, creating unbreakable protection for neural data. The opportunity to resume that research, to potentially prevent unprecedented privacy violations, was powerfully tempting. But trust remained the insurmountable barrier. "I need time to verify your claims," David said finally, "and I need assurance that Jason remains completely outside of this situation." Catherine nodded solemnly. "I understand, but we don't have much time. Neuralink is scheduled for release in 3 weeks. And now that Peterson has been eliminated, Division will be watching for any other potential leaks." "What about Scott Palmer?" David asked. "Where does he fit in this scenario?" A shadow crossed Catherine's face. "Scott is Division's primary contact at Innovatech. He oversees Project Nexus implementation and reports directly to their leadership. He's dangerous, David. If he suspects you know anything about the project, he won't hesitate to take action." The warning aligned with David's initial impression of Palmer. Still, he maintained his skepticism. "I'll continue working on the security modifications as agreed, but I'll need access to the full Neuralink architecture, not just the sections you've shown me." "Granted," Catherine said immediately, "but be careful what you access and when. Division monitors all system interactions. If you start digging too obviously into restricted areas, they'll notice." Their conversation was interrupted by Catherine's phone vibrating on the desk. She glanced at the screen, her expression darkening. "Scott has called an emergency executive meeting about Neuralink's security status," she reported. "He specifically requested your attendance." "That seems premature," David observed. "I've barely begun my assessment." "It's not about your assessment," Catherine said grimly. "It's about establishing control. Scott wants to evaluate you personally to determine whether you're a threat to Project Nexus." David felt the noose tightening. "And if he decides I am?" Catherine's eyes met his, genuine concern evident in their depths. "Then we've both just run out of time." The Innovatech boardroom projected power and success through every design element, from the massive table of polished mahogany to the floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. David entered alongside Catherine, acutely aware of the calculating gazes that tracked their arrival. Scott Palmer sat at the head of the table, a position that should have belonged to Catherine as CEO. The power play was obvious, establishing hierarchy before the meeting even began. Around him sat 5 other executives, each projecting the same blend of corporate confidence and thinly veiled ambition. "Catherine, Mr. Reeves, thank you for joining us," Palmer said, gesturing to the 2 empty seats. "Deliberately separated," David noted. "We thought it important to get a status update on the Neuralink security situation, given the proximity to launch." Catherine took her seat with practiced grace, betraying none of the tension David had witnessed in the lab. "Of course, Scott. Though, as I mentioned, Mr. Reeves has only just begun his assessment. Even preliminary insights would be valuable," Palmer replied smoothly, turning his attention to David. "Perhaps Mr. Reeves could share his initial findings." David recognized the trap immediately. Without knowing exactly what Palmer knew about Project Nexus, any statement he made could reveal his own knowledge or lack thereof. The safest approach was technical competence without specific revelations. "My preliminary review indicates several areas of concern," David began, keeping his tone professionally neutral. "The neural interface contains potential access vulnerabilities that could compromise user data. I'm currently mapping these vulnerabilities to determine their scope and potential solutions." "Interesting," Palmer said, leaning forward slightly. "And what specific access points have you identified as problematic?" The question was precision-targeted, designed to determine exactly what David had discovered about the back doors. He chose his response carefully. "The primary concerns are in the neural pattern recognition protocols," David replied. "Specifically, the error handling functions contain nested callbacks that could potentially be exploited by sophisticated attackers." Palmer's expression revealed nothing, but David noticed a slight relaxation in his posture, the confidence of a predator who believes his prey remains unaware of the real danger. "And your background in neural interface security comes from?" Palmer let the question hang, a clear invitation for David to reveal his connection to Datrix. "Various projects over the years," David responded vaguely. "Neural interface security is a specialized field with a relatively small community of experts." Palmer smiled thinly. Indeed, such a small community that most specialists know each other. Yet none of our team seems familiar with your work. Catherine intervened smoothly. Mr. Reeves's credentials were thoroughly vetted before his engagement, Scott. His expertise is precisely what we need to address the security concerns before launch. Of course, Palmer conceded with false graciousness. I'm merely expressing the board's interest in ensuring we have the right expertise for such a critical product. Neuralink represents a significant investment and opportunity for Innovatech. He turned to the other executives. Which brings me to the purpose of this meeting. Given the security concerns Catherine has raised, I believe we should consider delaying the launch to ensure all vulnerabilities are addressed. The suggestion sent a ripple of concern through the room. One of the executives, a sharp-faced woman David didn't recognize, spoke up immediately. A delay would significantly impact our IPO timeline, Scott. Investors are expecting Neuralink to hit the market before our public offering. Better a slight delay than a security scandal that tanks our stock on day one, Palmer countered. I'm simply suggesting we give Mr. Reeves adequate time to complete his assessment and implement solutions. David recognized the strategy with growing unease. Palmer was positioning himself as the voice of caution and security, while simultaneously buying time for Project Nexus to complete its implementation within Neuralink. A delay would serve Division's interests, not undermine them. That won't be necessary, David said firmly, drawing all eyes to him. I believe I can address the critical vulnerabilities within the original timeline. With proper resources and cooperation from the development team, we can maintain the launch schedule while ensuring user security. Palmer's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. That seems optimistic, Mr. Reeves. Perhaps dangerously so. I don't believe in setting expectations I can't meet, David replied, meeting Palmer's gaze directly. If I encounter obstacles that necessitate a delay, I'll be the first to say so. Catherine interjected before Palmer could respond. David's confidence is based on his preliminary assessment. I suggest we allow him to continue his work before making decisions about timeline adjustments. The tension in the room was palpable as Palmer weighed his options. Finally, he nodded with calculated magnanimity. Very well, Mr. Reeves will continue his security assessment with full access to the development team. We'll reconvene in 3 days to evaluate progress. As the meeting dispersed, Palmer approached David with the practiced smoothness of a corporate predator. I hope you don't feel I was challenging your expertise, Mr. Reeves. Security is simply a paramount concern for any neural interface technology. The potential for harm if vulnerabilities are exploited is significant. The implied threat hung in the air between them, dressed in corporate pleasantries, but unmistakable in its intent. I understand completely, David replied, matching Palmer's tone. Rest assured, I'll be thorough in identifying and addressing any potential exploits into the system. Palmer's smile never reached his eyes. I'm counting on it, for everyone's sake. As David and Catherine left the boardroom, the weight of the confrontation settled over them. Palmer had effectively declared his suspicion and established a deadline, 3 days before their next move would be forced. He knows, David said quietly as they entered the elevator. He's testing to see how much I've discovered about Project Nexus. Catherine nodded grimly. And now he's accelerating his timeline. We need to move faster than anticipated. What exactly are you proposing? The elevator doors closed, sealing them in momentary privacy. Catherine's expression was resolute, the corporate mask completely abandoned. We need to access the complete Project Nexus documentation, she said in a low voice. Not just the portions I've been permitted to see, but the full implementation specifications. With that, we can develop countermeasures that will render the neural influence capabilities inoperative while appearing to function normally. That documentation would be heavily restricted, David pointed out. Attempting to access it would immediately alert Division. Not if we use the right access credentials, Catherine countered. Dr. Chen's login still has the necessary clearance. Division hasn't deactivated it to avoid raising suspicions about her absence. David considered the implications. Using her credentials would be traceable. Whoever does it would be immediately identified as a security threat. Exactly, Catherine replied, her gaze intense, which is why I need to be the one who does it. As CEO, I can potentially justify my access if discovered. You, on the other hand, need to remain above suspicion to continue your work on the countermeasures. The elevator reached the research floor, but neither moved to exit. They stood in suspended animation, the moment of decision hanging between them. Why would you take that risk? David asked, still searching for the deception, the hidden angle. If you're caught accessing classified Nexus files, Division won't hesitate to eliminate you, just like Peterson. Catherine's expression softened slightly, vulnerability showing through her carefully constructed armor. Because some things are worth risking everything for. The technology we're developing could fundamentally change human autonomy. If I help create this monster, even unwittingly, then I have a responsibility to stop it. For the first time since meeting Catherine Morgan, David felt the possibility that she might be exactly what she claimed. Not a willing architect of Project Nexus, but a reluctant participant trying to undo a dangerous creation. Even if I believe you, that he said carefully, we'd need more than documentation to stop this. We'd need proof of Division's intentions, evidence of their unauthorized neural influence testing, something concrete enough to force regulatory intervention. That evidence exists, Catherine replied, in the same secured servers that contain the complete Nexus specifications. Peterson found fragments, which is why they killed him. But together with your security expertise and my access, we could extract the full documentation. The elevator doors opened, but still they remained, caught in the gravity of the decision before them. Working with Catherine meant trusting her, at least partially, with his safety and potentially Jason's. The risk was enormous. But the alternative, allowing Project Nexus to deploy unimpeded, was unthinkable. When would we make this attempt? David asked, his decision implicit in the question. Tonight, Catherine said without hesitation. After regular hours, when most of the security monitoring is automated rather than human, we'll need to move quickly before Palmer realizes what we're planning. As they finally exited the elevator, David's phone vibrated with an incoming call. The school's number flashed on the screen, sending a jolt of adrenaline through his system. Mr. Reeves, the principal's voice was tense. There's been an incident involving Jason. He collapsed during his presentation and experienced some kind of seizure. The paramedics are taking him to Oakwood Memorial now. The world seemed to tilt beneath David's feet. I'm on my way, he managed, already moving toward the exit. Catherine followed, concern evident in her expression. What's happened? Jason, David replied, his voice tight with fear. Seizure at school. They're taking him to the hospital. I'll drive you, Catherine said immediately, no hesitation in her offer. My car is in the executive garage. We can be there in 15 minutes. David wanted to refuse, to maintain separation between his son and the dangerous game he'd been drawn into. But urgency overrode caution. Let's go. As they rushed toward the parking garage, neither noticed Scott Palmer watching from the executive floor above, his phone pressed to his ear. Subject is responding as anticipated, Palmer said quietly. Proceeding to Phase 2. In the shadowy war of Project Nexus, a new battlefield had just opened, and Jason Reeves had become its first casualty. Oakwood Memorial Hospital's emergency department pulsed with controlled chaos, medical staff moving with practiced efficiency, patients waiting with varying degrees of distress, the antiseptic smell failing to completely mask the underlying sense of fear and pain. David pushed through the automatic doors with Catherine close behind, making directly for the triage desk. Jason Reeves, he said urgently to the nurse. 10 years old, brought in by ambulance from Westside Elementary about 20 minutes ago. The nurse checked her computer. He's in pediatric assessment, Bay 3. Are you his father? Yes, David replied, already moving in the direction she had indicated. Sir, you need to, the nurse began, but David was already halfway down the corridor, Catherine following in his wake. Bay 3 contained a cluster of medical personnel surrounding a small figure on a gurney. David could see Jason's face, pale and frightened, as a doctor shined a light into his eyes. Dad! Jason called out when he spotted David, relief washing over his features. David was at his side instantly, taking his son's hand. I'm here, buddy. What happened? The attending physician, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and an air of competent authority, addressed David directly. Mr. Reeves, I'm Dr. Patel. Jason experienced what appears to be a complex partial seizure during class. He's stable now, but will need to run some tests to determine the cause. He has juvenile autoimmune disorder. David explained quickly. He's under Dr. Winter's care. Could this be related? Possibly, Dr. Patel acknowledged, though seizures aren't a common manifestation of JAD. Has Jason experienced anything like this before? Never, David replied, studying his son's face carefully. Jason, can you tell me what happened? Jason's voice was small but clear. I was giving my presentation on neural networks. Then the screen started flashing weird patterns. My head hurt really bad, and then, I don't remember, I woke up in the ambulance. Dr. Patel made a note on her tablet. We'll want to run an EEG and MRI to check for any abnormal brain activity or structural issues. I've already contacted Dr. Winters. He's on his way. As the medical team prepared Jason for transport to radiology, David stepped slightly aside with Catherine, who had maintained a respectful distance during the exchange. This isn't a coincidence, David said in a low voice, tension evident in every line of his body. The neural network presentation, the flashing patterns, the seizure, it's connected to Project Nexus. Catherine's expression was grave. You think they targeted Jason? To pressure you? Or to warn me, David replied grimly. Palmer knows I met with Peterson. This is his way of showing what's at stake if I continue investigating. The cold calculation required to target a child sent waves of fury through David's system, his hands clenching involuntarily at his sides. Catherine noticed the reaction, placing a gentle hand on his arm. We don't know for certain that's what happened, she said softly. It could be related to his condition. You don't believe that any more than I do, David countered, though he didn't pull away from her touch. The timing is too perfect. Palmer mentions concern for security in the meeting, and an hour later my son experiences a seizure while presenting on neural networks. That's not coincidence, Catherine, that's coordination. Before she could respond, Dr. Winters arrived, his familiar presence bringing a small measure of relief to the situation. The specialist greeted David warmly before turning his attention to Jason's chart. Complex partial seizure, Dr. Winters mused, reviewing the notes. Unusual for JAD, but not impossible given the inflammatory pathways involved. I'd like to check his medication levels and run a more comprehensive autoimmune panel, along with the neurological workup. As Dr. Winters examined Jason, David noticed the boy's gaze fixed on Catherine with curious intensity. You're the brain-computer lady, Jason said suddenly, causing both David and Dr. Winters to look at him in surprise. Catherine stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral. I work with your dad, yes. No, Jason insisted, more animated now. You're the one who called. You said Dad was helping fix the brain computer. You knew about my condition. David's blood ran cold at this confirmation of what Jason had mentioned the previous night. Someone impersonating Catherine had contacted his son directly. Jason, I never called you, Catherine said gently, concern evident in her voice. When did this happen? Yesterday, after I got home from the hospital. Jason's brow furrowed in confusion. It wasn't you? But she sounded just like you. She knew all about the neural interface. Dr. Winters looked between them with growing concern. I think Jason needs rest right now. We can discuss this after his tests. As the medical team prepared to move Jason to radiology, David leaned close to his son. I'll be right here waiting for you, okay? Everything's going to be fine. Jason nodded bravely, though fear lingered in his eyes. Dad, be careful of the patterns. They do something to your brain. The warning sent a chill through David as they wheeled Jason away. He turned to Catherine, all pretense of doubt now abandoned. Someone impersonated you to contact my son, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Someone with knowledge of neural interfaces and my connection to you. Division is sending a very clear message. Catherine's expression had hardened into resolve. Then we need to send one back. Tonight's plan has just become more urgent. I can't leave Jason, David objected. Not after this. I understand, Catherine said, but consider this. The best protection for Jason now isn't just staying by his bedside, it's eliminating the threat entirely. We need that evidence, David. Without it, Division will continue operating with impunity. The logic was sound, but the emotional pull of remaining with his son created an impossible tension. David ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The tests will take at least 3 hours. Catherine continued gently. Dr. Winters is with him. This might be our only window of opportunity before Palmer increases security protocols. Before David could respond, his phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. Neural stimulation can be precisely targeted. Today was a demonstration only. Cooperation ensures no escalation. Division. The threat, so clinical in its delivery, ignited a cold fury in David's chest. They had targeted his son, used untested neural technology on a child to force his compliance. He showed the message to Catherine, whose face paled visibly. "My God," she whispered, "they're admitting to attacking Jason. This goes beyond unethical research. It's criminal assault. And they're confident enough to put it in writing," David noted grimly, "which means they believe they're untouchable." He stared at the message for a long moment, calculations and scenarios running through his mind with the precision that had once made him a top security architect. When he looked up, his decision was made. 3 hours, he said to Catherine, his voice steely with determination. "We get the evidence, then I'm back here with Jason, and once he's stable, we take Division down. Not just their project, but the people responsible for targeting my son." Catherine nodded, relief and resolve mingling in her expression. "I'll call my driver. We'll need to move quickly." As they prepared to leave, Dr. Winters approached with an update. "We're taking Jason for his tests now. The initial blood work shows some unusual markers that might explain the seizure, possibly a reaction to his medication. We should have more definitive answers in a few hours." "I need to step out briefly," David said, the lie bitter on his tongue. "Personal matter related to Jason's care. I'll be back before his tests are complete." Dr. Winters nodded understandingly. "He's in good hands, David. We'll take excellent care of him." As they walked toward the exit, Catherine spoke quietly. "Division will be monitoring the hospital. We need to be careful about being seen leaving together." David's jaw tightened. "Let them see. I want them to know I'm coming for them." The cold determination in his voice might have frightened Catherine if she hadn't felt the same righteous anger burning in her own chest. Together, they stepped into the afternoon sunlight, united by a common enemy and a shared resolution. The time for caution and half measures had passed. Division had made this personal, and they were about to discover the terrible mistake of targeting the son of a man with nothing left to lose. Catherine's sleek Tesla sliced through afternoon traffic with silent efficiency, its tinted windows concealing the grim-faced occupants from curious eyes. David sat in the passenger seat reviewing the hospital's security footage on his tablet, footage he had accessed remotely using skills from his previous life. "There," he said, pointing to a frame showing a woman entering Jason's school approximately 30 minutes before his seizure. "Facial recognition is inconclusive, but the height and build match Division's known field operative, Alexandra Harris." Catherine glanced at the image briefly before returning her attention to the road. "Harris is military intelligence, specializing in neural response training. If she was at the school, this was definitely a coordinated operation." "They used my son as a test subject," David said, the words coming out as barely more than a whisper. The enormity of the violation threatened to overwhelm his carefully maintained control. "They triggered a seizure to demonstrate their capabilities." "And to ensure your cooperation," Catherine added, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Division operates on leverage. They identify pressure points and exploit them without hesitation." David closed the tablet, forcing himself to focus on the immediate mission rather than the rage threatening to consume him. "Walk me through the plan again. How do we access the Nexus servers without triggering immediate security protocols?" Catherine navigated smoothly onto the highway leading back toward Innovatech headquarters. "The primary Nexus documentation is stored on a secure server separate from Innovatech's main network. Physical access requires executive credentials plus biometric confirmation." "Your credentials," David noted. "Yes, but that alone would flag the access as suspicious, since I'm not officially part of the current Nexus team," Catherine explained. "That's why we need Dr. Chen's login. Her access wouldn't trigger immediate alerts because she's still technically listed as a project consultant." "And you have her credentials?" Catherine's expression tightened slightly. "She gave me emergency access before her sabbatical. She suspected Division might attempt to contain her if she raised too many concerns about the neural influence capabilities." Smart woman, David commented. So we use Chen's credentials to access the server, then extract the evidence of unauthorized testing and neural manipulation research. What's our extraction method? Air gap transfer to encrypted storage, Catherine replied. The data never touches Innovatech's network, which means no digital trail for division to follow. David nodded approvingly at the approach. And our timeline? Server access is least monitored between 5 and 7 p.m. Shift change for security personnel. We're currently on schedule to arrive during that window. As they approached Innovatech's campus, David's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Winters. MRI complete, proceeding with EEG, Jason stable but anxious, asking for you. The message twisted in David's chest like a physical pain. He should be with his son, not infiltrating corporate servers. But the rational part of his mind, the security architect who had spent years identifying and neutralizing threats, knew that Jason would never be truly safe until division was stopped. Everything okay? Catherine asked, noting his expression. Jason's stable, David replied, pocketing the phone. They're running the EEG now. Catherine pulled into a service entrance at the rear of the Innovatech complex, using her executive pass to bypass the standard security checkpoint. We'll enter through the research division loading dock, she explained. Fewer cameras, less foot traffic. As they exited the car, David felt the familiar heightened awareness that came with high-risk operations. Senses sharpened, movements precise, mind calculating probabilities and contingencies with machine-like efficiency. This was the version of himself he had locked away when he became a night guard, a father focused solely on stability and safety. But division had forced his hand, had threatened the one person he had sacrificed everything to protect. Now they would face the consequences of awakening the security architect who had once been considered the best in the industry. Catherine led him through a series of service corridors and emergency stairwells, bypassing the main security systems with practiced ease. Her familiarity with the building's blind spots suggested long planning. This wasn't an improvised operation, but a contingency she had prepared for. You've been anticipating this, David observed as they ascended a rarely used maintenance stair. Catherine didn't slow her pace. I've spent the past year mapping division's integration into Innovatech. I always knew there might come a point when direct action was necessary. Yet you waited until now, David noted. Why? They reached a secure door marked Research Archives, authorized personnel only. Catherine paused, meeting his gaze directly. Because I couldn't do it alone, she admitted. The technical complexity of what Division has built into Neuralink requires someone with your specific expertise to unravel. And because I needed someone with the moral clarity to ensure the evidence would be used properly. She swiped her access card and pressed her thumb to the biometric scanner. The door unlocked with a soft click. The server room is through the main archive and to the left, Catherine instructed. Dr. Chen's workstation is still active. We'll use that to access the secure files. The research archive was a climate-controlled room filled with physical documentation of Innovatech's various projects, paper backups in an increasingly digital world. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of environmental systems maintaining optimal preservation conditions. David followed Catherine through the meticulously organized space, professional admiration mixing with growing unease. The level of security surrounding these archives suggested information far more sensitive than typical corporate research. They reached Dr. Chen's workstation, a sleek terminal positioned near a smaller, more heavily secured door marked simply Restricted Access. That's our target, Catherine said, nodding toward the restricted area. The physical server containing Project Nexus documentation. We access it remotely from this terminal using Chen's credentials, then transfer only the evidence we need. She seated herself at the workstation, fingers flying across the keyboard as she navigated through multiple security layers. David positioned himself to monitor both the entrance they had used and the restricted access door, hyper-aware of any sound that might indicate discovery. I'm in Chen's account, Catherine reported, her voice low. Accessing the Nexus directory now. David glanced at the screen, noting the impressive array of security protocols Catherine was navigating with practiced ease. You have more than basic knowledge of system penetration. A slight smile touched Catherine's lips without reaching her eyes. Before I was CEO, I specialized in encryption and system security. How do you think I recognize the significance of your work at Datrix? The terminal displayed a request for secondary authentication. Catherine produced a small device from her pocket, a hardware key generator that cycled through access codes on a proprietary algorithm. Chen gave you her physical authenticator, David observed, increasingly impressed with the forethought involved. She must have trusted you completely. We were friends before we were colleagues, Catherine replied, entering the generated code. She recognized Division's influence in the project before I did. Warned me multiple times that the neural interface was being modified for purposes beyond its original design. The screen flashed green, granting access to a highly classified directory structure. Catherine navigated quickly through the files, searching for specific documentation. There, David said, pointing to a subfolder labeled Field Implementation, Phase 1. That would contain test protocols and results. Catherine opened the folder, revealing dozens of documents with clinical designations. She sorted them by date, focusing on the most recent files. My God, she whispered as the contents became clear. They've been conducting unauthorized neural influence tests for months. Schools, nursing homes, public gatherings, anywhere they could introduce neural stimulation without detection. David leaned closer, reading over her shoulder with growing horror. The documents detailed systematic testing of various neural stimulation patterns, categorized by effectiveness in producing specific responses, from simple emotional reactions to complex behavioral modifications. These test subjects never consented, he said, recognizing the implications immediately. They don't even know they were part of an experiment. And this is why Division is willing to kill to protect Project Nexus, Catherine replied, copying the files to an encrypted drive. This isn't just unethical research. It's illegal human experimentation on a massive scale. As Catherine worked, David continued examining the documentation, searching for specific references to the school incident. He found it in a file labeled Targeted Demonstration, Subject JR10. They documented the attack on Jason, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, complete with neural response measurements and effectiveness ratings. Catherine paused in her copying to look at the file. This proves Division directly targeted your son. With this evidence, we can... The lights in the archive suddenly dimmed, then returned to full brightness. Both Catherine and David froze, instantly alert to the change. Security systems cycling, David murmured, recognizing the pattern. Someone's accessing the main controls. Catherine's fingers moved faster on the keyboard. We need another 3 minutes to complete the transfer. David moved toward the entrance, checking the corridor through the small window in the door. We may not have 3 minutes. How many files have we secured? About 60% of the critical documentation, Catherine reported. Enough to prove the illegal testing, but not the full implementation specifications or the Division leadership chain. The overhead lights flickered again, followed by a soft click as the door locks throughout the archive reset. David's security experience translated the signals immediately. They're isolating this section, he said urgently. Standard containment protocol. We need to move now. Catherine disconnected the encrypted drive, tucking it securely in an inner pocket of her jacket. There's an emergency exit through the restricted server room. My executive override should still work on that door. They moved quickly to the heavy security door, Catherine swiping her access card and entering a complex override code. The panel flashed red, denying access. They've disabled my override, she said, tension evident in her voice. We'll need to use the main exit. David assessed their options rapidly. If they've detected unauthorized access, they'll have security converging on this location from multiple points. Our best chance is to separate, divide their attention and resources. Catherine shook her head firmly. Absolutely not. Division will prioritize capturing you over me. Your technical knowledge makes you the greater threat to their operation. Which is exactly why we need to separate, David countered. You have the evidence. Getting that to the right authorities is the priority. Before Catherine could argue further, the main lights cut out entirely, replaced by the dim red glow of emergency lighting. The subtle hum of the environmental systems fell silent, plunging the archive into eerie quiet. Full containment protocol, David observed grimly. They know exactly where we are. Catherine made a quick decision. Secondary emergency exit, behind the physical documentation section. It's not on the main security grid. They moved swiftly through the darkened archive, navigating by the minimal emergency lighting. The scale of Division's response confirmed what they already suspected. The evidence they had secured was dangerous enough to warrant immediate and overwhelming force. As they reached the documentation section, David heard the distinctive sound of the main door opening. Security had arrived. "Go," he whispered to Catherine, positioning himself behind a tall storage unit. "I'll create a diversion. Meet me at the contingency location we discussed." "We never discussed a contingency location," Catherine hissed back. David's expression was resolute in the dim red light. "Peterson's apartment, 9 p.m. If I'm not there by 9:30, take the evidence to your media contact." For a moment, Catherine seemed about to protest. Then her training took over. She nodded once, squeezing his arm briefly before disappearing behind the rows of documentation toward the secondary exit. David waited until she was out of sight, then deliberately made noise by knocking over a small storage container. The security team responded immediately, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness toward his position. "Security breach in Section 3, a voice reported over a radio, proceeding to investigate." David moved quickly away from Catherine's escape route, drawing the security team's attention in the opposite direction. He could make out at least 3 separate flashlight beams, a substantial response team, likely armed. As he navigated through the darkened archive, David's mind calculated his own escape options. The main door was now guarded. The restricted access area was locked down. His best chance was to create enough confusion to slip past the security team and reach the maintenance stairwell they had used to enter. He deliberately triggered a fire alarm by breaking the glass on an emergency pull station. Immediately, strobing lights added to the confusion, and the piercing alarm would make radio communication between security personnel more difficult. The distraction worked. David heard shouted commands as the security team responded to the new development, their disciplined search pattern disrupted by emergency protocols. Using the confusion to his advantage, David circled back toward the main entrance, staying low and using the storage units as cover. He reached the door just as it opened again, admitting 2 more security officers. David pressed himself into a shadowed alcove, holding his breath as they passed within feet of his position. Once they moved deeper into the archive, he slipped through the still open door into the corridor beyond. The maintenance stairwell was 30 meters away, past a security checkpoint that would now be fully staffed due to the alarms. Direct approach was impossible. David assessed his surroundings with the cool calculation of his security architect days. The ceiling featured removable panels concealing utility conduits, a potential alternative route if he could reach them unobserved. A crash cart used for emergency medical responses stood against one wall. David quickly pushed it beneath an air vent, climbing on top to access the ceiling space. The panel moved easily, revealing a narrow crawl space above. He pulled himself up just as more security personnel rounded the corner, responding to the alarms. From his concealed position, David navigated slowly through the ceiling space, using the building's structural supports to move toward the stairwell location. Below, he could hear the organized chaos of a security response in progress. Radio communications, running footsteps, doors being systematically checked and secured. The scale of the operation confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't standard corporate security, but division operatives executing a prepared containment protocol. After what felt like an eternity of careful movement through the dusty confines of the ceiling crawl space, David reached a position above what should be the maintenance stairwell. He carefully moved a ceiling panel, peering down to confirm his location. The stairwell door was visible below, currently unguarded but likely to be secured soon as the search expanded. It was now or never. David lowered himself carefully from the ceiling, dropping the final few feet to land in a crouch beside the door. He tested the handle, still unlocked. Security hadn't yet expanded their containment perimeter to this area. He slipped through the door into the stairwell, descending rapidly but quietly toward the service exit. 3 floors down, he heard a door above him open, followed by the sound of footsteps entering the stairwell. "Check all levels," a voice commanded. "Subject may be attempting to exit through service areas." David increased his pace, reaching the ground floor as the footsteps above continued their methodical descent. The service exit was just ahead, a plain metal door leading to the loading dock area. He pushed through the door, emerging into the fading evening light. The loading dock was mercifully empty of personnel, though he could hear activity around the front of the building as the security response continued to unfold. David moved quickly toward the perimeter fence, staying in the shadows of delivery vehicles and equipment. The fence was 3 meters high, topped with security wire, a substantial obstacle but not impossible. Using a dumpster as a starting point, David scaled the fence with practiced efficiency, ignoring the bite of the security wire as it caught his clothing. He dropped to the other side, immediately moving toward the cover of nearby trees. Once concealed from immediate view, David paused to assess his situation. He had successfully escaped the Innovatech compound, but Division would be mobilizing resources to track both him and Catherine. His phone would be compromised, his apartment watched, his known locations monitored. But Division had made a critical mistake in targeting Jason. They had assumed it would make David more cautious, more willing to cooperate out of fear for his son's safety. Instead, it had unleashed the full capacity of the security architect who had once been considered the best in the business. Division had created their own worst enemy, a man with nothing to lose, expert knowledge of their systems, and the cold determination of a father protecting his child. David discarded his phone after sending a final text to Dr. Winters. "Emergency at work. Please stay with Jason until I return." Then he moved purposefully toward the city, already formulating his next moves in the dangerous game that had become a personal war. Behind him, the Innovatech building pulsed with activity as Division's operatives expanded their search. But their quarry was already gone, carrying with him the knowledge and skills to dismantle their entire operation. The hunter had become the hunted, and Division was about to learn the terrible consequences of threatening the son of David Reeves. Darkness had settled over the city by the time David reached Oakwood Memorial Hospital. He approached cautiously, staying in shadow, surveying the building for signs of Division surveillance. His trained eye quickly identified them: a dark sedan with 2 occupants at the east entrance, a solitary figure on a bench with too direct a line of sight to the main doors, a security guard whose posture and alertness suggested military training rather than typical hospital protocol. Division had anticipated his return to Jason. They were waiting. David circled the building, seeking alternatives. The service entrance used for supply deliveries appeared less monitored, a calculated oversight perhaps, as Division spread limited resources across multiple potential approaches. The hospital's layout was familiar to David from Jason's previous stays. The service corridor would lead past the kitchen, then connect to the main building near radiology, 1 floor below pediatrics, where Jason would likely be admitted for overnight observation. Using the identity badge of a maintenance worker he'd borrowed during his circuitous route through the city, David accessed the service entrance without challenge. He moved with purposeful confidence through the busy kitchen area, his generic uniform and deliberate pace rendering him effectively invisible to the harried staff. In the main corridor, David paused at a computer terminal, using the maintenance login to access the patient directory. Jason Reeves, Pediatric Ward, Room 412. Admitted for observation following seizure activity, condition stable. Relief washed through him, momentarily weakening the steely resolve that had sustained him since the archive escape. Jason was safe, at least for now. But how long would that security last if Division decided his son had become a liability rather than leverage? David took the service elevator to the 4th floor, emerging at the far end of the pediatric ward. He proceeded cautiously, aware that Division would have someone watching Jason's room directly. At the nurse's station, he noted a man in civilian clothes seated with a clear view of the corridor leading to room 412. The man's attention was too focused, his position too strategic to be a typical visitor. David retreated to a supply closet, quickly assessing options. Direct approach was impossible without revealing himself. He needed a distraction. From his pocket, he withdrew a small device, a universal remote for medical equipment he had acquired during his circuitous journey to the hospital, a remnant from his security testing days when he would routinely probe hospital systems for vulnerabilities. Now it would serve a more immediate purpose. He programmed the device rapidly, then activated it from the safety of the closet. Immediately, alarms at the nurse's station began to signal, patient monitoring systems reporting anomalies across multiple rooms. The coordinated response was immediate. nurses rushing to check affected patients, the surveillance operative momentarily distracted by the sudden activity. David slipped from the closet, moving against the flow of responding staff, reaching room 412 unnoticed in the controlled chaos. He entered quietly, closing the door behind him. Jason lay sleeping in the hospital bed, his small frame dwarfed by the equipment surrounding him. An IV delivered fluids to his arm, while monitors tracked his vital signs. His face, so often animated with curiosity and intelligence, was peaceful in sleep, though David noted the slight furrow between his brows, pain or anxiety penetrating even into unconsciousness. David moved to his son's bedside, gently taking his hand. Jason's eyes fluttered open, momentary confusion giving way to recognition and relief. "Dad," he whispered, his voice rough from sleep. "You came back." "Of course I did," David replied softly, squeezing Jason's hand. "How are you feeling, buddy?" Jason considered the question with his usual thoughtfulness. "Better. Dr. Winter said the seizure didn't cause any permanent damage, but they want to keep me overnight for observation." David nodded, carefully masking the fury that still burned at the thought of division deliberately causing his son's condition. "That's a good idea, just to be safe." Jason's gaze sharpened, his innate perceptiveness cutting through his father's careful composure. "You're in trouble, aren't you, because of the brain computer?" David hesitated, weighing truth against protection. Jason had always responded better to honesty, had always resented being sheltered from reality because of his age or condition. "Yes," David admitted finally. "Some people are using the technology in ways that could hurt others. I'm trying to stop them." Jason nodded, accepting this explanation with a maturity beyond his years. "Is that why that man has been sitting outside my room since I got here? The one pretending to be reading magazines but really watching my door?" David's estimation of Division's tactics immediately adjusted upward. They hadn't bothered concealing their surveillance from a 10-year-old boy, either sloppy or deliberately intimidating. Neither option improved his assessment of their ethical boundaries. "Probably," David acknowledged, "but you don't need to worry about him. I'm handling it." "With the brain computer lady? The real one, not the fake one who called me?" "Catherine is helping, yes," David confirmed, marveling at his son's ability to cut through complexity to the essential truth. "She wants to stop them too." Jason was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then he reached under his pillow and withdrew a folded piece of paper, handing it to his father. "I drew this before the seizure happened," he said simply, "during science class. I think it might help." David unfolded the paper, revealing one of Jason's intricate diagrams. But unlike his usual designs for improved systems or inventions, this one depicted what appeared to be a neural interface schematic. The detail was remarkable, showing connection pathways and what seemed to be vulnerability points in the architecture. "Jason, how did you—" David began, unable to complete the question as implications cascaded through his mind. "I don't know," Jason replied honestly. "I just saw it in my head, like a picture that needed to come out. Is it important?" David stared at the diagram, recognizing elements of Neuralink's architecture that he had only recently discovered himself, along with what appeared to be previously unknown backdoor access points in their counter protocols. The kind of insight that would require intimate knowledge of the system's design. "Yes," David said finally, carefully folding the drawing and placing it in his pocket. "It might be very important. But right now, the most important thing is for you to rest and recover." Jason nodded, though concern remained in his eyes. "Are you staying?" The question contained layers of meaning, not just tonight, but beyond. Was David staying in his role as night security guard, keeping their lives small and safe? Or was he returning to the world that had once defined him, with all its complexity and risk? "I can't stay right now," David said gently. "There's something I need to do to make sure this doesn't happen again, to you or anyone else. But Dr. Winters is here, and there are good people watching over you." Understanding crossed Jason's face. "You're going to stop the bad brain computer people." "That's the plan," David confirmed with a slight smile. "Just be careful of the patterns," Jason warned, his expression suddenly serious. "They make your brain do things you don't want to do." The warning sent a chill through David, not just for its content, but for the implication that Jason somehow understood the neural manipulation technology at a fundamental level. "I'll be careful," David promised, pressing a kiss to his son's forehead. "Get some rest. I'll be back before you know it." As Jason's eyes began to close again, pulled down by medication and exhaustion, David made a silent vow. Division would pay for what they had done to his son, not through violence or vengeance, but through the complete dismantling of their project and exposure of their crimes. David checked his watch, 8:17 p.m., less than an hour until his planned meeting with Catherine at Peterson's apartment. He needed to move quickly, but first, he needed to ensure Jason's security during his absence. He located Dr. Winters at the nurse's station, pulling the specialist aside for a private conversation. "I need to step out again," David explained in a low voice. "There's a situation related to Jason's condition that requires my attention." Dr. Winters' expression was concerned but understanding. "David, I've known you for 2 years. You've never left Jason's side during a hospital stay. Whatever's happening must be serious." "It is," David confirmed. "I can't explain everything now, but I need to know Jason will be protected while I'm gone. There are people who might take an unhealthy interest in his case." The doctor's expression shifted subtly, professional concern deepening. "Are you suggesting someone deliberately caused Jason's seizure?" David hesitated, then nodded once. "I have reason to believe it wasn't accidental. That's what I'm addressing now." Dr. Winters was silent for a moment, processing this disturbing information. Then his expression hardened with professional resolve. "I'll stay with him personally," he promised, "and I'll arrange for a different security protocol. Hospital staff only, no outside personnel. We have procedures for protecting patients in sensitive situations." Relief washed through David. "Thank you. I should be back by morning, but if anything changes with Jason's condition, I'll use the emergency contact you provided," Dr. Winters assured him. "The secure line, not your cell phone." David nodded gratefully, reminded why he had trusted this man with Jason's care for the past 2 years. As they shook hands, Dr. Winters added quietly, "Whatever you're dealing with, be careful. Jason needs his father." "I know," David replied, the weight of responsibility settling firmly on his shoulders. "That's exactly why I have to do this." Leaving the hospital proved simpler than entering it. The division operatives were focused on monitoring arrivals, not departures. David slipped out through the same service entrance he had used to enter, disappearing into the gathering night with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to moving unseen. Peterson's apartment was across town, a journey that would require caution and indirect routes to avoid potential surveillance. But David moved with renewed purpose, Jason's diagram secure in his pocket, a potential key to undermining Project Nexus at its foundation. The game had shifted from defense to offense, and David Reeves was playing to win. James Peterson's apartment building stood in a quiet neighborhood of modest professionals, the kind of unremarkable residence that attracted little attention by design. David approached cautiously, circling the block twice to identify any surveillance before determining it was as safe as could be expected under the circumstances. The building's security was minimal, a main entrance requiring key fob access, but with the expected vulnerability of residents holding the door for those behind them. David waited patiently until a young woman returning from a dog walk provided exactly this opportunity, nodding thanks as he caught the closing door. Peterson's unit was on the third floor, 3C, at the end of a carpeted hallway that muffled footsteps and provided limited escape routes. A security professional's nightmare, but perhaps Peterson had valued the privacy more than tactical advantages. David checked his watch, 8:54 p.m. If Catherine had escaped Innovatech and evaded division's surveillance, she would arrive within minutes. If she didn't appear by 9:30, he would have to proceed alone, assuming the worst about her status. The apartment door featured standard locks, nothing that would present a significant challenge to someone with David's background. Using tools he had acquired during his journey across the city, he made quick work of the lock, slipping inside and closing the door silently behind him. The apartment was dark, but David resisted the urge to turn on lights that might be visible from outside. Instead, he used the small pen light from his toolkit to navigate the space. Peterson's living area reflected the man David had known, meticulously organized, minimalist in decoration, with the functional efficiency of someone who valued clarity over comfort. A desk in the corner held a computer setup more sophisticated than typical for a personal residence. Multiple monitors, advanced security features, independent power supply. David moved to the desk, examining it without touching anything. If Peterson had maintained backup copies of the Project Nexus evidence, this would be where he stored them. But the system was powered down, and attempting to boot it might trigger security protocols that would alert Division to his presence. Instead, David searched for physical storage, the kind of redundancy a security professional would maintain for critical information. He found it in the form of a hollowed-out book on the shelf above the desk. Cryptonomicon by Neil Stephenson, a fitting choice for concealing digital secrets. Inside was a small, solid-state drive, unlabeled but secured in protective casing. David pocketed it carefully, continuing his search of the apartment for any additional evidence or information that might prove useful. A soft knock at the door froze him in place. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 more. The pattern he and Catherine had used during their security work at Innovatech. Relief washed through him as he moved silently to the door, checking the peephole before opening it just enough to allow Catherine to slip inside. She entered quickly, her professional composure somewhat diminished by the events of the past hours. Her suit was wrinkled, her hair escaping its usual perfect arrangement, a small cut visible on her cheek, evidence of a less than smooth escape from Innovatech. "You made it," she said simply, genuine relief evident in her voice. "I wasn't sure you would." Division underestimated the motivation of a father protecting his son, David replied, securing the door behind her. "How did you get out?" "Service tunnels beneath the research building," Catherine explained, moving further into the apartment. "They connect to the original structure from before Innovatech expanded. Division hasn't fully mapped them yet." She looked around the darkened apartment, taking in the sparse furnishings and organized efficiency. "Peterson lived exactly as I expected," she observed, like a man prepared to disappear at a moment's notice. "Did you secure the evidence?" David asked, focusing on priorities. Catherine nodded, reaching into her jacket to withdraw the encrypted drive they had used at Innovatech. "Everything we managed to download before security arrived. Test protocols, implementation details, authorization chains. Enough to prove Division's illegal human experimentation." "And Jason," she added, her concern appearing genuine. "Is he all right?" "Stable," David replied, studying her expression carefully. "The seizure didn't cause permanent damage, according to DeWinters, but Division has the hospital under surveillance." Catherine's expression darkened. "Of course they do. They'll be monitoring all possible contact points now that we have the evidence. We need to move quickly to release it before they can contain the situation." "The evidence won't be enough," David said, withdrawing Jason's diagram from his pocket. "We need to do more than expose what they've done. We need to render the technology itself non-viable." He unfolded the drawing, placing it on Peterson's desk where they could both examine it. Catherine leaned forward, confusion evident in her expression as she studied the intricate schematic. "What is this? It looks like elements of Neuralink's architecture, but with modifications I've never seen." "Jason drew it," David said quietly. "Today, before the seizure. He said he just saw it in his head." Catherine looked up sharply, the implications registering immediately. "That's impossible. He couldn't have knowledge of these systems unless the neural stimulation division used on him created some kind of unintended connection," David finished. "They may have given him insight into the very system they used to attack him." Catherine turned back to the diagram, professional interest overriding her initial shock. "These appear to be counter-protocols, methods for identifying and neutralizing the neural influence pathways without disrupting the interface itself." "Exactly," David confirmed. "If we can implement these modifications to the Neuralink architecture before launch, we not only expose Division's actions, but make their neural manipulation technology functionally useless." Catherine straightened, decision crystallizing in her expression. "We need access to Innovatech's development servers, not just the documentation we retrieved, but the actual Neuralink codebase, which is impossible now that Division knows we've accessed restricted files," David pointed out. "The entire system will be locked down, security doubled." "Not entirely impossible," Catherine replied. a hint of her strategic mind emerging through the fatigue. There's a development backup maintained off-site. Disaster recovery protocol. Only 3 people have access. Me as CEO, Scott Palmer as COO, and Dr. Chen as lead architect. And division will be monitoring all 3 access points, David noted. 2 of them, Catherine corrected. They'll be watching my credentials and Palmer's. But Chen's access might still be viable if used from an unexpected location. David considered this. You still have her authentication credentials? Catherine nodded. And more importantly, I know the physical location of the backup server. It's not in a traditional data center. It's in a converted warehouse owned by a separate shell company, technically unconnected to Innovatech. A legitimate security measure or division's private facility? David asked skeptically. Originally legitimate, Catherine explained, established before division's involvement as protection against corporate espionage. They've likely co-opted it now, but the original security systems remain independent from Innovatech's main network. David processed this information, calculating risks and probabilities with the precision that had once made him a top security architect. If we can access the development backup, implement Jason's counter protocols, and push the changes to the production environment, we could effectively neutralize the neural influence capability before the Neuralink launch, Catherine finished, while simultaneously releasing the evidence of division's illegal experimentation to regulatory authorities and selected media outlets. The plan was audacious, technically complex, and incredibly dangerous, but it represented their best chance of not just exposing Project Nexus, but rendering its core technology harmless. We'll need specialized equipment, David said, shifting to implementation mode, and a secure way to transmit the evidence if we're compromised during the attempt. Catherine moved to Peterson's desk, examining the computer setup with professional appreciation. James would have had what we need. He was always prepared for contingencies. As she spoke, David noticed something he had missed in his initial search. A small safe concealed behind a removable panel beneath the desk. The kind of hiding place only another security professional would think to check. "Help me with this," he said, kneeling to access the panel. Together, they removed the covering, revealing a biometric safe with both fingerprint and retinal scanning requirements. Peterson's security protocols were always comprehensive, Catherine observed. We won't be able to bypass this without his biometrics. David studied the safe thoughtfully. Maybe we don't need to bypass it. Peterson was methodical, but he also believed in contingencies. If this safe contains critical materials, he would have established emergency access for a trusted party. You think he trusted you with access to his secure safe? Catherine asked skeptically. Not me specifically, David replied, leaning closer to examine the biometric scanner. But Peterson and I established mutual contingency protocols during our work at Datrix. Standard procedure for security architects working on classified projects. He positioned his right thumb on the scanner, then leaned forward for the retinal scan, murmuring under his breath, "Emergency Protocol Delta 97 Alpha." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the scanner emitted a soft tone, and the safe clicked open. "Voice print confirmation with embedded passphrase," David explained, responding to Catherine's surprised expression. "Combined with approximate biometric matching, not looking for exact matches, but confirming I'm human and speaking the correct phrase." "Impressive," Catherine acknowledged as David opened the safe. Inside were exactly the resources they needed: specialized hacking equipment, secure communication devices, and most critically, detailed schematics of the off-site backup facility Catherine had mentioned. "Peterson was investigating division's operations more thoroughly than I realized," Catherine said, examining the facility schematics. "These include security patrol schedules, access points, camera positions, everything we need to infiltrate the backup server location." "He was building a case," David observed, sorting through the equipment, gathering evidence systematically, preparing for precisely the situation we're in now. As they organized the materials, a small envelope caught David's attention, hand-labeled simply, "David, if necessary." He opened it to find a handwritten note from Peterson. "David, if you're reading this, I've likely been eliminated by division. The Project Nexus neural manipulation technology is more advanced than either of us initially realized. They have moved beyond theoretical applications to active field testing, including targeted manipulation of specific individuals. Most concerning is their apparent success with younger subjects, whose neuroplasticity makes them more receptive to the technology. The implications for privacy and autonomy are catastrophic if this technology deploys as planned. The encrypted drive in this safe contains complete documentation of Division's illegal activities, including the neural targeting protocols they're using against test subjects. Password: Jason's birthday plus your Datrix employee ID. One final warning: trust no one completely in this fight. Division's neural influence technology can affect perception and decision-making without the subject's awareness. Even those who believe they're working against Project Nexus may be unwittingly serving its purposes. The counter protocol in the encrypted files provides temporary protection against neural influence. Use it. James David read the note twice, the implications sending a chill through his system. He handed it to Catherine without comment, watching her expression as she absorbed Peterson's final warning. He's suggesting that Division could be influencing us without our knowledge, she said quietly, returning the note to David. That we might not be able to trust our own perceptions. Or each other, David added, the already complex situation gaining another layer of uncertainty, which is why we need to implement the counter protocol he mentioned. He located the encrypted drive in the safe, connecting it to one of Peterson's secure tablets. Using Jason's birthday combined with his old employee ID as the password, he unlocked the contents, revealing comprehensive documentation of Project Nexus far beyond what they had managed to extract from Innovatech's servers. Peterson was thorough, Catherine observed, reviewing the files with growing concern. This goes higher than I realized. Division isn't just a rogue government project. It has authorization from senior intelligence officials and private sector partners. David focused on locating the counter protocol Peterson had mentioned in his note. He found it in a subfolder labeled Emergency Measures, a surprisingly simple application designed to generate specific visual and auditory patterns that disrupted the neural influence pathways. This is similar to the concepts in Jason's drawing, David noted, comparing the counter protocol to his son's diagram. The fundamental approach is the same, though Jason's version appears more sophisticated in its implementation. How could he have known, Catherine wondered, genuine confusion in her voice. Even with neural stimulation during the seizure, this level of insight seems impossible for a 10-year-old with no prior exposure to the technology. David had been considering this question since seeing Jason's diagram. I think Division may have underestimated the potential for neural feedback during their demonstration. They intended to show their capability to induce a seizure, but instead created a temporary connection that gave Jason direct insight into their systems. A backfire, Catherine suggested, their own technology revealing its vulnerabilities. Exactly, David agreed, activating Peterson's counter protocol application on 2 separate devices, one for each of them, which gives us an advantage they won't be expecting. The application generated a seemingly random pattern of light and sound, subtle enough to avoid attention, but according to Peterson's documentation, sufficient to disrupt potential neural influence attempts. How do we know if this is actually working? Catherine asked skeptically, watching the pattern cycle on her device. We don't, David acknowledged. That's the problem with neural influence technology. By design, the subject remains unaware of the manipulation. All we can do is take precautions and proceed with the mission. Catherine nodded, the professional strategist visibly reasserting control over her concerns. So we move forward with the plan. Infiltrate the backup server facility, implement Jason's counter protocols in the Neuralink architecture, and release the evidence of Division's illegal activities. With one addition, David said, retrieving the solid-state drive he had found in Peterson's hollowed-out book. We need to ensure the evidence reaches the right authorities even if we're captured or killed. Peterson would have established dead man switches for precisely this scenario. Catherine's expression hardened with resolve. Let's find them, and then let's end Project Nexus permanently. As they worked through Peterson's contingency protocols, setting up automated evidence releases that would trigger if they failed to check in at specified intervals, David found himself studying Catherine with renewed uncertainty. Peterson's warning about neural influence made trust impossible, even as their mission required coordinated action. For her part, Catherine seemed to accept this new reality with the pragmatism that had characterized her professional success. "We don't need to trust each other completely," she observed, noticing David's scrutiny. "We just need to share the same objective, stopping division from deploying neural manipulation technology on an unsuspecting public, and preventing them from targeting Jason or anyone else again," David added, his motivation crystallizing around this central point. Catherine nodded in agreement. "Then let's get to work. The backup facility is 20 minutes from here. Security patrols change at 11 p.m., and we have counter protocols to implement." Together, they gathered the equipment they would need, studying the facility schematics one final time. The mission ahead was dangerous, complex, and far from guaranteed success. But it represented their best chance to end Project Nexus before its technology could be deployed. As they prepared to leave Peterson's apartment, David activated the secure communication device they would use to coordinate during the operation. The stakes had never been higher, not just for his career or Jason's safety, but for the fundamental concept of mental privacy and autonomy for every potential Neuralink user. Division had created a weapon that threatened the very nature of human independence. Now it was time to disarm it permanently. The final confrontation was about to begin. The backup server facility resembled an abandoned warehouse from the outside. Peeling paint, minimal external lighting, chain-link fence with rusted no trespassing signs. The deliberate appearance of neglect served as effective camouflage for the cutting-edge technology housed within. David and Catherine observed from the cover of an adjacent building, using night vision equipment from Peterson's cache to study security patterns. As the schematics had indicated, armed guards patrolled the perimeter at 15-minute intervals, while fixed cameras covered potential approach vectors with minimal blind spots. "Security is heavier than when I last accessed this facility," Catherine noted, counting 4 guards where the schematics indicated there should be 2. "Division has clearly upgraded protocols since discovering our activities at Innovatech. But they're still following predictable patterns," David observed, timing the guard rotations. "And they haven't addressed the fundamental vulnerability in their perimeter design." He pointed to a section of the facility where an old loading dock created a potential entry point. The camera coverage appeared comprehensive, but David had identified a 3-second gap in the rotation pattern, invisible to casual observation but critical to someone with his security background. "We'll need perfect timing," Catherine said, studying the approach. "The camera blind spot only exists for a moment between rotation cycles, which is why most security professionals would consider it acceptable risk," David replied. "But most isn't good enough when defending against someone who designs security systems for a living." They waited for the guard patrol to complete another cycle, confirming the timing remained consistent. Then, equipment secured and counter-protocol devices active, they moved toward the facility with the coordinated efficiency of professionals executing a carefully planned operation. David led the way, counting down the seconds until the critical camera rotation. 3, 2, 1, now. They sprinted across the exposed area, reaching the loading dock precisely as the camera began its rotation away from their position. Using specialized tools from Peterson's cache, David quickly defeated the electronic lock on the service door, allowing them entry to the facility's maintenance area. Inside, the contrast with the exterior was stark. Gleaming corridors, advanced environmental controls, and state-of-the-art security systems revealed the true nature of the facility, a high-security data center disguised as abandoned industrial space. "Server room is 2 levels down," Catherine whispered, consulting the facility schematic they had memorized. "Central core, biometric access, independent power, and cooling systems." David nodded, checking the specialized device that would defeat the biometric security. "Internal cameras, motion-activated in the corridors, continuous in the server room, and at security checkpoints," Catherine replied. "But they feed to an isolated network. If we can access the security control room, we can loop the footage temporarily." "Too risky," David decided. "Better to use the maintenance pathways, fewer cameras, designed for technician access to infrastructure systems." Catherine agreed, and they proceeded through a series of narrow utility corridors that ran parallel to the main facility pathways. David navigated with the confidence of someone who had designed similar systems, anticipating security measures and identifying vulnerabilities with practiced ease. They encountered only one technician during their descent to the server level, a close call that required pressing into a shallow utility alcove as the man passed within inches of their position. The encounter confirmed David's assessment. Division had increased perimeter security, but maintained standard protocols within the facility itself, confident in their outer defenses. The server level presented the first significant challenge, a security checkpoint with 24-hour staffing and multiple authentication requirements. The maintenance pathway terminated at a locked access panel that would open directly into the secured area. Two guards at the checkpoint, David observed through a small ventilation grate. Biometric verification required for all personnel, regardless of clearance level. Catherine studied the layout through the grate. The server room entrance is 30 meters beyond the checkpoint. No way to reach it without being seen. David considered their options, weighing risks against time constraints. We need a diversion, something significant enough to draw the guards away from their posts without triggering a full facility lockdown. He examined the utility systems accessible from their current position, identifying the environmental control panels that regulated temperature and humidity for the sensitive server equipment. Perfect, he murmured, opening the control panel and studying its configuration. With careful precision, he modified the settings to create a gradual temperature increase in a server zone far from their target area. Environmental alert in 5 minutes, he explained to Catherine. Critical servers operating near temperature thresholds will force a technician response. When the guards verify the technician's credentials, we use the distraction to access the server room. Catherine nodded approval of the strategy. Elegant, minimal disruption, maximum effect. They waited in tense silence as minutes ticked by. Finally, alarms began to sound, subtle at first, then more insistent as environmental sensors detected the rising temperatures in the affected server zone. Response was immediate. A technician appeared at the security checkpoint, presenting credentials and explaining the situation with urgent gestures toward the affected area. Both guards engaged with the technician, one checking credentials, while the other monitored security feeds to verify the reported issue. Now, David whispered, quickly defeating the lock on the access panel. They slipped into the secured area, using the guards' diverted attention to move swiftly toward the server room entrance. Catherine approached the biometric scanner, pressing her palm against the surface while David applied a specialized bypass device to the secondary authentication system. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the indicator light changed from red to green, and the heavy security door unlocked with a soft click. They entered quickly, securing the door behind them. The server room was a testament to modern computing power. Rows of gleaming equipment stretching in perfect alignment, cooling systems humming with efficient precision, status lights blinking in rhythmic patterns that indicated normal operations. Development backup servers are in the restricted section, Catherine said, leading the way through the technological maze. Isolated network, independent power supply, military-grade encryption. At the far end of the main server room, another security door protected the most sensitive systems, including the Neuralink development backup. This door featured even more advanced protection, dual biometric authentication, encrypted keycard access, and continuous video monitoring. This is where Chen's credentials are essential, Catherine explained, withdrawing a specialized device from her equipment bag. The system requires not just biometric data, but specific network authentication that can't be easily spoofed. She connected the device to the security panel, initiating a complex sequence designed to simulate Dr. Chen's authorized access attempt. David maintained watch on the main server room entrance, alert for any response to their environmental diversion. We have 4 minutes before the temperature issue resolves itself, he noted, checking his watch. After that, security will return to normal patterns. Catherine worked with focused intensity, her fingers moving across the device with practiced precision. Almost there, she murmured. The system is accepting Chen's authentication profile, but it's requesting secondary verification from Innovatech's main network. Expected security protocol, David observed. Can you bypass it? Not bypass, but simulate, Catherine replied, activating a secondary function on the device. Peterson's equipment includes pre-recorded network responses for precisely this scenario. The security panel processed the simulated verification, internal mechanisms whirring as it evaluated the authentication attempt. Finally, the indicator shifted to green, and the door released with a pneumatic hiss. "We're in," Catherine said, relief evident in her voice. The restricted server area was significantly smaller than the main room. Just 6 server racks, each containing specialized hardware dedicated to Innovatech's most sensitive projects. Catherine moved directly to the third rack, identifying the specific servers that contain the Neuralink development backup. "We'll need direct system access," she said, connecting a specialized laptop to the server's maintenance port. The neural interface code is isolated in a protected partition with multiple encryption layers. David joined her at the terminal, his security architect expertise coming to the forefront as they navigated through the system's defenses. Using a combination of Chen's access credentials and specialized decryption tools, they gradually gained access to the protected Neuralink architecture. "There it is," David said as the neural interface code appeared on the screen, "the foundation of Project Nexus and its greatest vulnerability." He withdrew Jason's diagram, spreading it beside the laptop as they examined the code structure. The parallels were unmistakable. Jason had somehow perceived the fundamental architecture of the system, identifying the precise connections that enabled neural influence capabilities. Working together, David and Catherine began implementing the counter protocols from Jason's diagram, modifying the neural interface code to prevent unauthorized influence while maintaining normal functionality. The work was complex, requiring deep understanding of both the technology and its potential exploitation. "These modifications are elegant," Catherine observed as they progressed. "They don't just block the influence pathways, they redirect them into detection protocols that would alert users to any attempted manipulation." "Jason has always had an intuitive understanding of systems," David replied, pride momentarily overriding the tension of their situation. "He sees patterns where others see complexity." As they worked, David's trained senses detected a subtle change in the facility's background noise, a shift in the environmental systems that suggested the temperature diversion had been resolved. Their window of opportunity was closing. "Security will be returning to standard patterns," he warned Catherine. "We need to complete the implementation and initiate the update sequence within the next 3 minutes." Catherine nodded, fingers moving faster across the keyboard as they finalized the critical modifications. "Almost there. The system will resist these changes. They fundamentally alter the proprietary functionality Division has implemented, which is exactly why we need to force an automatic update to the production environment," David replied, initiating a specialized sequence designed to override normal validation protocols. "Once these counter protocols are in the live system, Division won't be able to remove them without taking the entire neural interface offline." A warning appeared on the screen, the system detecting unauthorized modifications to core architecture components. Catherine quickly bypassed the alert, using Chen's highest level credentials to authorize the changes and initiate the update sequence. "Update initiated," she confirmed, "pushing to production environment now. Division will detect the changes within minutes, but by then it will be too late to stop the propagation." David nodded, already moving to the next phase of their plan. Now for the evidence distribution. Using Peterson's secure communication device, he activated the dead man switches they had configured, sending the complete Project Nexus documentation to selected regulatory authorities, journalists, and oversight committees. The information would be released in a cascading sequence, ensuring that even if Division managed to suppress some outlets, others would continue the distribution. "Evidence distribution initiated," David confirmed. "Peterson's contingency protocols are executing as designed." As they disconnected from the server and prepared to exit, an alarm suddenly blared throughout the facility. Not the subtle environmental alert from earlier, but a full security breach notification. "They have detected our presence," Catherine said, quickly gathering their equipment. "Either the system modifications or unauthorized access to the restricted server area." "We need to move," David agreed, already heading for the exit. "Alternate escape route through the maintenance levels, east side emergency exit, as outlined in Peterson's schematics." They moved swiftly through the server room, abandoning stealth for speed as the facility's security systems shifted to full alert status. Red warning lights pulsed in the corridors, and the sound of security personnel responding to the breach echoed through the previously quiet spaces. David led the way to a maintenance access point, quickly defeating the lock and guiding Catherine into the utility corridor beyond. They navigated the narrow passage at a controlled run, heading for the emergency exit that would lead them to the facility's east perimeter. Security response will be concentrated at standard exit points, David noted as they moved. The emergency exit is designed for evacuation, not infiltration. Their coverage will be lighter. As they neared the exit point, Catherine's secure communication device buzzed with an incoming message. She checked it quickly, her expression shifting to one of surprise and concern. "It's from my contact at the Regulatory Commission," she reported. "They've received the Project Nexus evidence and are mobilizing an immediate response. FBI Cybercrime Division has been notified and is preparing to secure Innovatech headquarters." "That's faster than expected," David observed. Peterson's reputation must have lent credibility to the evidence. They reached the emergency exit, finding it secured with standard crash bar mechanisms designed for rapid evacuation. David checked the exterior through a small security window, confirming their escape route remained viable despite the facility-wide alert. "Two guards converging on this position from the north perimeter," he noted. "We have approximately 40 seconds to clear the fence line before they have visual contact." Catherine nodded, adjusting her equipment for minimum hindrance during their escape. "Ready when you are." David pushed the crash bar, triggering the emergency exit alarm, but gaining them access to the exterior of the facility. They moved at a sprint toward the perimeter fence, using shadows and equipment cabinets for minimal cover as they crossed the exposed ground. The fence presented the final obstacle, 3 meters high with security wire at the top. David quickly deployed a specialized tool from their equipment, creating a temporary gap in the barrier large enough for them to pass through. "You first," he instructed Catherine, keeping watch on the approaching guards. She slipped through the opening efficiently, turning immediately to help stabilize the gap as David followed. They cleared the perimeter just as flashlight beams cut through the darkness behind them. Security personnel responding to the breach alerts. Not pausing to confirm pursuit, they continued moving away from the facility, using the industrial landscape for cover as they put distance between themselves and Division's operatives. Only when they had reached the predetermined extraction point, an abandoned subway maintenance tunnel 3 blocks from the facility, did they pause to assess their situation. "We did it," Catherine said, a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration in her voice. "The counter protocols are implemented, the evidence is distributed, and Division's neural manipulation capability has been effectively neutralized." David nodded, checking the secure communication device for updates. "Peterson's distribution protocol is working perfectly. The evidence has reached all designated recipients, and initial responses indicate the information is being taken seriously at the highest levels." The implications of their success were profound, not just the exposure of Division's illegal experimentation, but the prevention of widespread neural manipulation technology deployment. They had protected countless potential victims from having their thoughts and behaviors influenced without consent. Most importantly to David, they had ensured Jason's safety. Division's neural influence capabilities had been neutralized, rendering them unable to target his son again. "What happens now?" Catherine asked, the adrenaline of their escape beginning to fade. "Now we complete the mission," David replied, his expression resolute. "We return to the hospital to ensure Jason's security while the authorities respond to the evidence. Division will be desperate, their entire project collapsing around them. They might attempt one final strike against perceived threats." Catherine's expression hardened with determination. "Then we face it together. We've come too far to fail now." As they prepared to leave the safety of their temporary shelter, David's secure communication device buzzed with an incoming message. The text was brief but significant. "Division leadership containment operation underway. Palmer in custody. Hospital security reinforced. Return immediately." Dr. Winters' involvement in the secured communications suggested a level of coordination David hadn't anticipated. The pieces fell into place rapidly in his mind. Winters' immediate understanding of the situation at the hospital, his willingness to implement enhanced security protocols, his knowledge of secure communication channels. Winters is part of this, David realized aloud. Not Division, but some counterforce that's been monitoring Project Nexus. Catherine studied the message, professional assessment evident in her expression. Oversight Commission most likely. Peterson would have established connections with legitimate government authorities as insurance against Division's influence. The development added another layer to the already complex situation, But the immediate priority remained unchanged: Jason's safety and the final neutralization of Division's threat. "Let's move," David said, gathering their remaining equipment. "The hospital is 20 minutes from here. Division's operational capability is compromised, but not eliminated. This is the most dangerous phase, when they have nothing left to lose." Together they emerged from the maintenance tunnel into the quiet pre-dawn streets, moving with renewed purpose toward Oakwood Memorial Hospital. The final confrontation awaited, not just with Division's remaining operatives, but with the truth about Project Nexus and its implications for all involved. The night of secrets and shadows was approaching its end, and in its place a new day would dawn, one in which the hidden potential of both David Reeves and his son would finally be recognized and valued for what it truly was: not a weapon to be exploited, but a gift to be protected.